All set?
Yep.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lawrence City Commission meeting. While we don't have any proclamations today, I'd like to open our meeting by addressing an issue of concern to our community. The investigation regarding the officer-involved shooting incident, which occurred on May 29th, 2018, has been referred to the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Investigation by a third party is a national best practice. In the interest of preserving a thorough and impartial investigation of the incident for all involved, we cannot provide any comment about this matter until the investigation is concluded. We understand that a number of citizens are upset and concerned. We want to hear you. So that all those who wish to speak will be provided an opportunity, we ask that speakers during public comment limit their remarks to 3 minutes. Thank you. We'll now go to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Are there any items that a member of the commission would like to remove from the consent agenda?
8I and 13. They're the same thing. They're both the over
Okay.
the edge.
Okay. Any other items on the consent agenda that a member of the commission would like to remove?
Move that we approve the consent agenda,
Well,
including...
let's see if there's anyone from the
Oh, I'm
public who
sorry.
wishes.
I
Is
thought
there
you were
anyone
asking for
in the
permission.
public who'd like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none.
Yeah. I move that we approve the consent agenda accepting 8I and 13, including all claims.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Ananda, a second from Commissioner Herbert. All in favor? Aye. That's unanimous. Okay. We have 8I and 13. Leslie?
Yeah, they both have to do with the over the edge event, which I'm sure is a fabulous event. You know, it's the Boys and Girls Club. But I know that it's always been an issue with the neighborhood of closing down any part of 9th Street since it's such a heavily trafficked street. You know, that's why the Lawrence Art Center has their events on New Hampshire and not on 9th Street because it's easier to block that off than a very trafficked street. So while I might be okay with letting this one go forward, I would want to caution anyone from closing off 9th Street in the future.
I would like to invite public comment on this.
Is that the applicant?
Yeah. Okay, we have the applicant here. Great. Okay. Well,
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Alyssa Bauer. I'm the Director of Marketing for the Boys and Girls Club here in Lawrence. I'm the one that has worked with your fantastic staff here at the city to try to apply for an event that the Boys and Girls Club's never done before. I did definitely get some similar feedback from Mark Teal about what I wanted to do originally was to close down 9th from New Hampshire to Rhode Island. And he was like, I don't think that's gonna work. Like, let's see if we can get you guys right at the end of the alley. So with that being said, when I submitted our application, I actually got consent signatures from every business that was around that 9th Street area that you're talking about right now, which included Port Fonda, City Wine Market, the Dandy Hair Studio, the Mark Trevino law offices, and all 5 businesses that were in there. Great American Bank was one of the more difficult ones to get, mainly because they were like, hey, most of our traffic for our for our drive-through Saturday 9 to 12 that's typically comes from that 9th and New Hampshire intersection. So I definitely understand your point and was able to meet with all the individual business owners about that. The only signature that I didn't get was that from, sorry, and that also included Sally Zagrai from downtown Lawrence, although she won't obviously be affected by the street closure. The only one that I was not able to get, and that's just because they have to go up the corporate train, is the downtown Lawrence Marriott. And they have actually been really receptive and helpful. But I've talked with Seahawk, the traffic closing, that's who I'm gonna use to like do the barricades and like the traffic close signs and whatnot, to say how could I get the entrance for their parking garage, entrance and exit for their parking garage to remain open. So really, it's not even gonna be half a block. It's gonna be like half a block and then a quarter of it taken out, so the access to the downtown Marriott parking garage stays open throughout the event. So the alleyway in between that where 9th and New Hampshire is and 9th and Rhode Island is, that alley in the middle will stay open also because of first responders and whatnot needing to be able to get there quickly. So I have been advised to keep that alley open as well. So
How long will you have 9th Street closed down?
from 9 a.m. we'll probably start setting up, closing everything down at like 8 a.m. and it'll open again at 5 p.m.
So all day?
all day.
Yeah.
On the 25th.
Okay, questions? Other questions?
Did I explain it?
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you guys.
Public comment on this issue? Okay, let's bring it back.
Yeah, like I said, you know, I'm not gonna pull the stakes out on this one, but in the future, don't close down 9th Street. Where's Mark Teal? That's the message that I wanna send. We'll let this one go by, but 9th Street has way too much traffic on it to be closing down any of it. And there's a truck route, obviously, through there, so.
Okay, so we're considering 8I. I'd entertain a motion.
8I, that's for the alcohol. I'm sorry. 8I is for the alcohol
Right,
permit, okay.
ordinance 9473.
So I make a motion that we went on an ordinance number 9473 allowing the sale, possession, and consumption of alcohol on the public right-of-way on Saturday, August 25th, 2018, from 9 to 5 in the East 200 block of 9th Street for the Over the Edge event.
Before we do the motion, I did want to get your all's feedback on closing 9th Street. I'm just one person. I can't ban all events from closing down 9th Street. It would be very helpful, I think, for staff if they heard your feedback.
I think I would have to look at it on a case-by-case to see what the situation is. I mean, obviously, it's a busy street, so I
And a truck route.
understand.
Yeah.
I realize that, but,
I concur with Commissioner Larson, Vice Mayor Larson.
yeah. I don't think it'd be optimum, but I'd like to look at each event as it comes up.
It sounds like as the first event for this particular organization, as far as asking for something like this, there's probably, as with planning any event, a lot of learning opportunities for going through that. And so this might be, I think this is the first event since I've been on the commission that has requested 9th Street be closed. So it'll be a bit of a learning experience, I think, for all of us as well, to see the effect that that has. There's also the farmer's market on Saturdays as well. So I think that there are a lot of things to consider when it is, what it looks like, what the timeline is, and how much of the street is closed.
I'd agree. I think, we'll see this later on tonight when we talk about the tour of Lawrence issue, that, it really is a case-by-case basis. I wouldn't be comfortable issuing a blanket statement to Mark that we should not close down a specific street ever for any reason.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion, but no second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, Vice Mayor Larson, second from Commissioner Herbert. All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. And then we move on to item 13. I'd entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve a special event permit for Over the Edge fundraiser hosted by the Boys and Girls Club of Lawrence on August 25th, 2018, located at 888 New Hampshire Street.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Herbert, second from Commissioner Ananda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And again, that's unanimous. Okay. So we'll now move on to public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda, after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment, and we have a clock right over here that we can use to do that timing. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments or questions to the commission. So, public comment.
Commissioners, hello, good evening. My name is Laura Green. I live at 2115 New Hampshire Street. In 2005, I asked the Lawrence City Commission to enact an ordinance banning the use of marijuana in the city of Lawrence. That ordinance was passed and enacted in July of 2006. I did so to protect applicants for federal student financial aid from having their financial aid delayed or denied under the higher education drug provision. This provision asks students if they have been convicted of marijuana offenses at the state or federal level. It does not deny or delay student financial aid to persons who are convicted in municipal courts. Hundreds of municipalities around the country passed similar laws around this time and continue to do so today. Since the Lawrence ordinance was enacted in 2006, there has been a dramatic shift in attitudes in our country and in our state towards the use of marijuana. Over 30 states have legalized marijuana in some form, and many more are voting on ballot measures this fall. I'm here to ask the City Commission to add an item to a future agenda to discuss amending the city ordinance on marijuana offenses. The current ordinance states that the fine is $200 and a subsequent drug evaluation can add hundreds of dollars to the cost of what I consider to be, and many consider to be, a minor infraction. I'd like to ask the Commission to debate on a future agenda item whether that fine should be lowered, and I would suggest that we lower it to $25 and remove the drug screen requirement. Many citizens in our community back this proposal, and I still get calls about this. People will Google marijuana Lawrence and it just pops up my name. So people still find me and call me about this, and they complain to me bitterly. Some of them are here tonight, actually. And many of us feel that the Lawrence ordinance should be modernized, and it should be modernized in accordance with other progressive communities like ours who prioritize sensible drug policy in their community. I think our Lawrence citizens understand the need to balance progressive and sensible drug policies while adhering to state and federal law. Oh, I still have time. Here in Kansas, a ballot measure in Wichita to lower the fine to marijuana possession of $50 was approved by the voters in 2015, although it was subsequently struck down by the Kansas Supreme Court due to a technicality of the way the ballot was written. The City Council of Wichita went ahead and enacted and approved the same ordinance that the voters overwhelmingly approved. Putting this matter up for discussion as an agenda item at a commission meeting would avoid a public vote on this matter, which we feel would be costly and unnecessary. The progressive political climate here in the Lawrence community would be highly likely to support this type of change to lower the fine and eliminate the drug screen, except in cases of a diversion. I thank you for your consideration of this agenda item.
Thank you very much.
My name's Katie Welsh. I live at 732 Rhode Island. I completely concur with the former speaker. And when you have a drug test, they send it to the KBI, and I believe it's $50 that you're charged. It might be more now. So that's another fee to a low offender. So anyway, I just have a question, maybe for Mr. Marcus or the mayor. Walking to the meeting, there are at least 12 police officers in a van behind the Reuters building right now. And I asked them, what's up? And they said, oh, we're just having a good time. And I said, really? I said, you know, it's a little scary to have this many officers in my neighborhood, and you won't say why. And after the shooting, I just think it's a little odd. So maybe there's a picnic or something. Could someone explain it? Thank you.
Thank you. We generally, as a general practice, do not discuss or debate these items. I understand that, sir, but you know, we refer them to staff as we need to.
Commissioners, microphone, please. Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. Over the past few weeks, I've sent or wasted my time sending several missives to the commission and the city manager and Downtown Lawrence Association about the deplorable conditions on Massachusetts Street. Massachusetts Street is becoming a haven for vagrants and transients, and even for people walking dogs who allow the dogs to defecate on the sidewalk, and trash, and it's getting to be a real problem. On Sunday night last, I happened to be on the sidewalk to the 900 block of the east side of Massachusetts Street, and there was a man staggering around who was obviously so intoxicated he could barely walk, and he went over to a car and tried to enter it, and found out it wasn't his car, but he found out he couldn't get in, so he staggered back. We see a lot of that on Massachusetts Street, and there are certain vagrants who I determine have tenure. They are allowed certain places along the street to hold out their hand and get money, get food, and then if they get food, they just leave the cartons or containers there, and we have trash. I know these are privileged people. They rank right up there with the landlords and the developers, and us lower caste people would like to be able to walk down the street without encountering this situation. The other situation involves motorcyclists. Now, motorcycles come up and down Massachusetts Street because they have a right. And most of them look like they're Hell's Angels wannabes. And motorcycles are loud. My ancient ears don't need to be pummeled by a loud sound. And it's well known that loud noises are a health hazard, or health hazards, and particularly to people with heart conditions. But yet we have all of these motorcyclists who run, run. There's one individual in particular who does that, and that's just his childish way of sticking a finger in the community's eye. And I know I'm wasting my time in bringing this up because the city commission isn't going to do anything about it. You're like the people who give money to the transients and vagrants. You're enablers.
I assume we're speaking about all issues here, right?
Except those that are on our agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
The street closure for the bike race, would that be something?
That will be later. We'll have public comment on each of the issues that are further on the agenda.
Okay.
This is general public comment for items that are not on our agenda this evening.
My name is Umut Bayramoglu. I live at 1039 New York. What transpired last Tuesday evening, a stone's throw away from this building, in my mind, is a disgrace and makes me feel ashamed to be a Lawrencian. Trained law enforcement officers take dangerous, violent, white criminals into custody without shooting them all the time. As it stands, the criminal justice system in this country doesn't even pretend to be separate and equal. It is unequal, unfair, unjust to people of color, poor and oppressed groups. In Lawrence, we've always said we were better than that. We've always said our police doesn't do those things. They are better trained and more discreet. Last Tuesday's tragic event put a stop to that mythology. And what is worse in my mind is the deafening silence that we got from our local leaders, our police chief, and municipal government. Yes, we all know Johnson County is investigating the incident, but in order to comfort the community, reassure the citizenry, our leaders must show transparency and show full accountability. We demand and have the right to know, are we currently requiring our officers to go through de-escalation training? What % of our officers are currently trained? How often do they go through training, and when was the last time they did so? In addition, now that the local media has chosen to identify Mr. Nell Lewis, we also have the right to know the names of the officers involved, their history in law enforcement, their de-escalation training credentials. We also demand that they go through controlled substance testing. Also, in regards to the click or ticket program that started all this, how many officers were assigned to this program? What was the breakdown of areas that were patrolled? And can you reassure us that it was not contained to certain neighborhoods or areas of town? We need to ask ourselves if we're the city of Free State in name only, or if we mean it. As Lawrencians, we need to decide whether we're going to contribute to the horrendous national statistics or become a shining example of what a compassionate, progressive community can do to prove that we live our values and values of those who founded our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the regular agenda. Our first item is to consider adopting on second and final reading ordinance number 9324 pertaining to a community police review board.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. The item before you was on the May 1st agenda. As you will recall, the City Commission at that time made a number of significant changes to the ordinance, to the draft ordinance. And since that time, staff has incorporated those comments into the draft that's before you tonight. Just to briefly summarize what those changes are. Number one, we have updated the definitions section to include the protected classes under Chapter 10 of our city code, which is related to human relations. We added language requiring the board to accept a written statement from a complainant during its review of an appeal. We added language requiring the entire Office of Professional Accountability file to be handed over to the board in its review in executive session, subject to some redactions that the City Attorney's Office would weigh in on. We also changed references to closed session to executive session for consistency within the draft. We added a standard of review for the board to use during its review in executive session, and that's going to be substantial competent evidence. We added language requiring the city manager to consider the board's recommendation in making a final determination as opposed to may consider, as was in the previous draft. We also added language regarding training and requiring the city manager or his or her designee to report to the city commission each year on that training, including what type of training it was and the length of that training. And we also added a new section prohibiting retaliation against a complainant, a witness, or a police officer involved in the filing of a complaint under this article. As I said, those changes have been incorporated into the draft that's before you tonight. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions from Maria?
I did have a question about, in terms of a public records request, when a file is turned over to an elected official in an executive session, oftentimes they're marked confidential, and under such circumstances, it's oftentimes protected by attorney-client privilege. Given that the police review board would be made up of individuals who are not elected but rather appointed, and thereby are by definition just members of the public and in line with the idea of a police review board, would any file turned over to such a police review board then be accessible to the media through an open records request?
No, it wouldn't be, because the way that the ordinance is written, the file is provided to the board, but the language explicitly says that no copies can be made. The board members cannot take those copies with them outside of executive session. So there's no paper trail that the board members are leaving with. And further, there's also a provision in the ordinance that prohibits those board members from revealing or discussing anything they learned in executive session to anyone outside. So there's no open records issue there.
Could you just walk us through what happens with the complaint as it goes through this process up to the point of it being potentially appealed and how it's handled? Could you just kind of walk us through the steps?
So from start to finish, a complainant would either file a complaint with the police department, as is done currently, and the police department accepts it in any form, whether by email or a letter or verbal. Or alternatively, what this ordinance is doing is allowing that complainant to come to the board and submit in a confidential manner a complaint saying that I believe that this officer committed misconduct of some type. At that point, if it's provided to the board member who received the complaint will forward that complaint to the Office of Professional Accountability for investigation internally. And that complaint will be handled in the manner that complaints are handled now, which is all internally. But the difference now is that what this ordinance would do is that if the complainant is not satisfied with the result or the conclusion of the police department in that complaint, now that complainant can file an appeal with this new board that we're setting up. At that point, the board, if the complaint is related to racial or other bias-based policing, would take the Office of Professional Accountability file into executive session and consider all of the facts using a substantial competent evidence standard, meaning that they're going to look at the entire file, all of the facts that were presented to the police department, and determine whether there were enough facts available to the police department that support the police department's conclusion. And if the board finds that there are enough facts to support the police department's conclusion, they will affirm the decision of the police department and forward that conclusion to the city manager. If, however, the board finds that there is not substantial competent evidence to support the police department's findings, they will share that recommendation as well with the city manager, who must consider that conclusion by the board. And the city manager at that point will make a determination on whether discipline is necessary or warranted for that particular officer.
One of the items that was added to this new version, I should say, talks about redacted, possibly redaction of forms and pages, in those would not go to the board. So how can the board make a decision if the police redact information, even whole forms, from what I can tell?
So the types of redactions that we're anticipating at this point are things that are not open records to the public. That includes social security numbers, criminal history information, any medical records, things that aren't necessarily related to the case. There might be cases also where there's a pending criminal investigation or some kind of criminal prosecution, and if, to protect the integrity of that investigation or prosecution, we would need to redact some information, that would also be taken out. But we aren't anticipating redacting so much of the file that it's useless to the board. Obviously, we would redact only what we believe is necessary to protect the city's interests.
So whose job is it to determine what to redact?
So the ordinance in the new language states that those redactions would need to come from the city attorney's office. So the city attorney would receive the file of Office of Professional Accountability, review it carefully, and then determine what needs to be redacted, and then give direction for those redactions to be made.
Would it be beneficial to kind of detail what potentially could be or redacted versus what shouldn't be redacted?
The only issue with detailing it very specifically in the ordinance is that if we exclude anything, then we would be prohibited from redacting it. So if we say only social security numbers and criminal history can be redacted, then maybe there's a case down the road in which highly sensitive criminal investigation information is provided. In that case, now we can't redact it because we've limited ourselves in the ordinance. So that's why it was left intentionally broad.
Okay, thank you.
Is it my understanding, though, that the city manager in reviewing that would not have a redacted report? Is that right?
That's actually not in the ordinance, but
Correct.
the city manager would be part of the city. The city manager is not a board member on this citizen review board, so the city manager could review the unredacted file, yes.
Okay.
One more question. On number 3, you've added in here, in its review of the police department's factual findings, the board will review the evidence but will not reweigh it, and it will not make witness credibility determinations. Can you explain what that means?
Sure, so there are different so just to start, we selected substantial competent evidence because that is the standard of review that's used by appellate courts in Kansas and all over the country when that higher authority is reviewing only the facts of a lower court or some other body. Here, the board would only be reviewing facts as opposed to doing a de novo review or unlimited review, where the board would be the one interviewing all of the witnesses and making a factual determination from the beginning. So that is the most appropriate standard of review here. It means that the board is considering the file that the police department considered and determining whether, yes, all of the facts here do support the police department's findings, or no, you failed to consider this very important fact, and so we don't think that you reached the right conclusion.
Will the board be able to view tapes?
So preliminarily, I think as generally, possibly, I think that would be provided to them. We did say here that redactions might not be made due to the form that the item is in. So if let's say that it's a audio recording or a video recording in which a redaction is just not possible, because we don't have the equipment for it, or because the whole thing would have to be redacted because it identifies somebody, like a witness, then that item just would not be provided. However, the report from OPA should have a summary or at least some kind of detail about what that audio or video recording says.
So they can withhold tapes and videos and audios?
If it includes some kind of private information that's not public, like I said, maybe personal contact information or information regarding an ongoing criminal investigation that cannot be redacted, then it would not be provided. That's correct.
Okay. The board won't be interviewing any of the complainant, or is that correct?
The board, under the new language, can accept a statement as you requested previously. So if the complainant wants to provide a written statement to the board to consider an executive session, that can certainly be provided. But the board will not be tasked with interviewing the complainant or other witnesses.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Thank you. Public comment on this issue? Good evening.
I am Justin Alexander Cabral, 2706 Redbud Lane, Apartment 6. I would like to remind you and everyone here, just because it seems like we've forgotten, that we do live in Lawrence, Kansas. This city was founded with the purpose of making Kansas a free state, where free slaves could find refuge from murder and brutality under bogus laws. So it's unfortunate that racial and economic discrimination are alive and well in Kansas today, but don't think for a moment that Lawrence is excluded from this national tragedy. The Community Police Review Board gives citizens a little power to hold accountable those who wield tremendous power in our community, but in its current form, the CPRB is toothless. The police department and its union would have you believe that by expanding the board's access to the full scope of a police investigation, that will somehow corrupt the integrity of a police investigation, but I'm sorry, I don't buy that. If the review board is conducting its investigation independently of the police department, and if the board members are just as committed to justice and equal protection under the law, just as our police department claims to be, then citizens who face bias and discrimination at the hands of police may actually stand to gain what they've been promised and but denied for so long, which are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I really hate to invoke the inalienable rights for something like this, but I mean, this should kind of be the bare minimum in my view. And so I can't understand how the police department can, on one hand, demand our trust that they will be good stewards of the power that we, the people, have granted them, while at the same time arguing that the citizens of Lawrence have no right to fact-check their claims. So if the department has nothing to hide, then the Community Police Review Board will find nothing. But if there is systematic bias and discrimination in our police department, which given last Tuesday's events, I suspect there could be, then our citizens deserve to know about it. The Journal World reported today that the proposed ordinance states that the file can be redacted on a case-by-case basis to protect confidential information related to the complainant, witness, or officer, or to protect the integrity of the investigation, and also that there's not a bright-line rule regarding what type of information could be redacted from the file and what has to be included. And so my recommendation to you, Commissioners, is to give the Community Police Review Board the tools it needs to do its work on behalf of the community. Give the board access to the full file, unredacted. Allow the board to make its report to the city after the conclusion of the police investigation, and then allow the Office of Professional Accountability to work with the review board to make the redactions that will protect the complainant and the witness. Because, and notice I didn't say protect the police. I believe the police already have enough protections as it is. And do I need to remind you that the police department works for me? The department answers to you, Commissioners, but you will have to answer to me. The proposed ordinance gives the toothless review board maybe 1 or 2 teeth, but please reconsider the ordinance and give them a full set of teeth to fight back against bias, discrimination, and injustice in Lawrence. The world is watching.
Further public comment?
Trinity Carpenter, 2113 West 26th Street. I didn't catch much what the Assistant City Attorney said, but what I did catch is very concerning. I know the City of Lawrence can do better than that. I think the person before me spoke very clearly on why that's not sufficient. That's not a citizen police accountability measure. It doesn't describe that. Like, that describes an internal process that is trying to keep as internal as possible, and that was described multiple times. The community is asking to be able to hold who has pledged to protect and serve them accountable. And like he spoke to, if nothing is wrong, there should be no issue to being transparent to the community. If nothing is wrong, and everyone is required to keep this data, everyone is required to track this because it's such a salient issue in our society. We all know there's racial and ethnic disparities in our systems. We know that to be true, and we call them that, but we know it also reflects oppression. That's what a disparity is in data, oppression, right? And so if oppression is going on in the Lawrence community, surely you'd want the community to ask more of you guys. And no one can hold anyone in this community accountable if you're not transparent. So that ordinance that was just proposed, hopefully none of y'all are considering that. Hopefully you would ask them to go back to the drawing board and try to center the community that they're supposed to be accommodating. Please, like, that was not okay. And she very clearly, the fact that video is not being considered at this point is an issue with what just transpired in Topeka. We had to have state legislators give clarification of what municipalities could and could not do. And so that city ordinance cannot pass without considering and being very clear what the public is given access to when it comes to video and audio of what transpires when the police comes to interacting with us, because you're also asking us to fund these things. And if I'm gonna fund a body cam, it is an accountability measure, not to collect evidence, ever, ever.
Further public comment on this issue?
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers, 2628 Bridge Court. A couple nights ago, outside where I worked, a couple of campus police pulled someone over, and we were thinking it's for a headlight, but I was just wondering, will the campus police pulling people over be held under this review? Like, are they held to the same standards as the Lawrence police? Could anyone answer that?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Like campus police pulling people over, like, it was on 23rd Street. So if campus police are doing Lawrence police work, shouldn't they be held to the same standards? I was just wondering, I don't know if they are or not, so I was just wondering, so.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah.
So the city of Lawrence only has jurisdiction over the Lawrence Police Department, even though the University of Kansas Police Department works in Lawrence, the city doesn't have jurisdiction over them, and so our ordinance would not be able to tell them what to do. So this only applies to our city department.
Can you provide information about where campus police operate in the city of Lawrence?
Sure, there's a state statute under Chapter 22 of this statutes in Kansas that provides jurisdiction for all law enforcement agencies, including the Lawrence Police Department, city agencies, but also university agencies as well, and that is on campus and then streets adjacent to campus, unless they are provided jurisdiction by the city through an MOU, in which case they could go into other parts of the city. But under the law, they are limited only to campus and then areas directly next to campus.
Do we have such a memorandum of understanding?
There is an old one from the late 1990s that provides jurisdiction for certain parts of town. I don't know off the top of my head which ones they are, but that allowed University of Kansas police officers to go in that part of the city.
And
So I do know of one.
is there also a hot pursuit rule that they can follow someone who's fleeing campus?
Hot pursuit is usually reserved for leaving the jurisdiction of the city itself, but I suppose that an officer from the university in legal pursuit of someone on campus could follow them outside of their jurisdiction as long as it's a valid reason
Okay.
for following them.
Thank you.
So I'd just kind of like to clarify, so if that officer actually did pull somebody over, that campus officer had pulled somebody over on 23rd Street, what, I mean, and that would be out of
You're
his-
Justin.
I'm sorry, yes, I'm
right?
Justin
Yeah.
Cabral, yeah. I'm just kind of piggybacking off of his question because I don't think it was very well addressed. So if that officer was outside of his jurisdiction, how, I mean, what is there that can be done to redress that? I mean, maybe we should have a meeting.
So if a person feels that they were wronged by a University of Kansas police officer, it wouldn't come to the city. They would be able to complain to the Kansas Seapost Agency, which is the agency that certifies, actually, I'm not sure because they're not city law enforcement or state law enforcement. They could make a complaint to the state. Which agency, I would have to check for you, but again, it wouldn't be local.
Additionally, they're University of Kansas employees, so they would be able to complain to the university, their HR, or the Office of Institutional Opportunity and Access.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Further public comment on this issue? Dan, I'm saying further public comment, asking if there's anyone else who'd like to speak to this issue.
Hi, my name is Nancy Stark. I live at 720 Louisiana Street. I wasn't really planning to speak, so I don't have a prepared speech, but several years ago, I considered volunteering to be on the board. And I had a couple of conversations with the mayor, with Leslie Soden, about that, and was told that there was a process in place to review how the board operates. And so I'm just kind of, I have more time now that I'm retired. I'm just kind of tuning back in and wondering whether it's taken a couple of years for that process to happen. And in the interim, have any people been appointed to the board, or has it been running, I think, with less people than it was supposed to run with? I guess this discussion has made me a little wary of applying or asking to be appointed to the board. So I would like to know more about the process of how citizens can show an interest in that and how they're chosen or what the process is. I'm sorry, I haven't read I guess it's online, right? And I'm sorry, I haven't read it, so this may be kind of an ignorant question, but I guess where I went was, what if there's something really egregious that happens and someone, a citizen on the board, leaks to the press? What would happen to them?
Well, I guess there's a couple questions there. Diane, I'd like to ask you to address the advisory board process a little bit, if you'd mind doing that.
Yes, Mayor, you mean how
Right.
appointees are made to the board?
Yeah.
Well, in general, the city has a policy about appointments, which those are recommended by the mayor, and they get added to the consent agenda for the city commission to take action on, and then an appointment is approved by the commission as a whole.
Okay. And with regard to what happens if there's a leak from someone on the board, there are sanctions that are contained in the ordinance, and we can ask Maria to talk about that.
Under section 1-2508, we have a section for breach of privacy, which is a non-person misdemeanor for a board member to leak or provide confidential information that they've gained in their capacity as a board member. In addition to that, before being sitting on the board, that board member has to sign a confidentiality agreement in which they acknowledge that the information that they're receiving is sensitive information and that they are not allowed to disclose it to anybody.
Thank you.
Mayor, can I just provide a little bit of clarity on this?
Sure.
So it is not on the website as of yet because it hasn't been created yet. So once it's approved, so you couldn't apply yet. But you'll use the same advisory board webpage for other advisory boards. It'll have a separate application and process, but essentially the same place. But just so we're clear, it isn't something you can apply for or volunteer for at this point. But when it's approved, then
if and when we
Right.
approve the board, then there will be a process.
Right, and it'll be a similar process to what we have now, but because of the qualifications, obviously, the application process will have further requirements, but it'll still be reviewed by you and recommended by the mayor and then approved by the commission.
Thank you, Sherry.
The old board, the Citizens for Fair and Impartial Policing, I might be leaving out an adjective on that, but yeah, I didn't make any appointments to that last year because we were disassembling it.
Right.
And so it's been not had the quorum since for 2 years now?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's been quite a process to get to this point.
Yes, it has. Did not expect this one to take so long.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I think we can bring this back to the commission now.
Mayor, I did have one quick question for Maria.
Sure.
I just want to clarify that under the existing policy before us tonight, does the Citizen Review Board have any power to subpoena an officer?
No, it doesn't, for a few reasons. Number one, usually the subpoena power is a creature of statute, so we have to have a state statute that says this person, this board, this entity can have subpoena power. However, the municipality could provide subpoena power to it under its home rule authority. So it is possible to give this board subpoena power. The issue is enforcement of that subpoena. And there is some Kansas case law and attorney general opinions that say enforcement of such a subpoena is difficult in municipal court because the court has direct subpoena contempt power but not indirect, and so it's difficult to get people to come under that subpoena. Further, the board is not allowed under U.S. Supreme Court decisions to compel statements from the officers because the board is not the employer of the officer, and so even if the board were allowed to get the officer there under subpoena, the officer is not obligated under law to speak to the board.
Thank you.
I also had a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
So regarding video redaction or the lack of ability to do so, is it not possible to redact by deleting audio or muting audio in certain parts of video?
I think that would certainly be possible. We would definitely want to consult with IT on those questions to see what would be possible, and we would try our hardest to make as much available to the board as possible.
And would it be possible if it's a matter of, and I guess I'm looking at like what is the standard? So when is a witness part of that video? Is that when, you know, the camera pans to the right, or a statement is made by a witness off camera? So then would that invalidate that entire video because the appearance or audio of that witness is single time?
I mean, so you're saying that if the city were wanting to protect the identity of a witness, then we
It was my
redact it in one spot, but let's say the interview was an hour long, then different camera angles might expose that person again. I mean, I think your question goes to the heart of it, which is that these have to just be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
But my question is it possible to edit out a minute of video or 30 seconds of video, or a minute of sound or 30 seconds of sound versus pulling out an entire 2-hour tape based on a single statement or a single appearance?
My initial reaction is yes, I would think that's possible, but I'm not an expert in IT at all, so I think we would just consult with them and try to make it work. But I think that's a good idea, and we would definitely look into it.
I do too. Is there anyone here tonight who could speak to that from the police department? No?
No, Chief? No.
No, okay. Because I think that, you know, supporting where we started looks very different from where we are today. And the concerns about the city manager having to review this, the concerns about a clearly stated standard of review, the concerns about the files that are provided, we have come a million miles. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily there. However, given what has happened in our community recently, I also feel an urgency to have this in place. And I know that other commissioners and city staff have as well. And so we've worked to get this done as quickly as possible since it's been reintroduced. But I don't feel entirely comfortable saying, you know, on a case-by-case basis alone, not knowing the extent to which they're willing to provide as much as possible, especially with video and auditory evidence. I think that that has such an impact on these cases. And I think in regard to forms, you know, we have received a request for tracking stops and demographics for individuals who have been stopped by law enforcement. And if this entire video can be redacted as in not provided at all because they're collecting demographic information, then we're doing a disservice, I think, by not being willing to cut that out. And if merely by asking for that information, we're making these videos inaccessible to that board, I just think that that's both wrong, I guess. So is there a way to clarify that information so that we can?
I was just scrolling through to see where it would be inserted, but we could have something along the lines of where we add a sentence that says every effort will be made to not redact entire videos or entire audio transcripts, and instead effort will be made to only redact minor portions of it as much as possible, something like that. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so that's my legalese.
Well, in 12504B2, they talk about the file, and so the broad language can be more specific if we find whether or not they're capable of providing that. I don't think we're going to find that tonight and be able to just kind of craft some language up here. But I also want this to move as quickly as possible because it's time.
If that's language that we're all interested in, we can always do a first reading and then make sure it's added by
No.
the second reading.
This
We
is
do
the
that a lot.
second reading.
This is the second.
And I guess my
Second,
take on
second
that
reading.
is it does say in its entirety, except as such file may be redacted to protect confidential affairs. So I think the ordinance itself does say in its entirety,
Mhm.
which would include the video and the audio. So I think the direction we're giving is fairly clear with the existing ordinance.
What section are you on there? I'm trying
We're
to
in,
see.
Number 2.
It's 1
B2.
2504, B2.
B2.
So I think it's definitely, the default is full disclosure, only necessary redactions.
Do you think that's enough staff direction that's already in the ordinance to prioritize not redacting entire videos?
Well, I think the mayor makes a good point that we've left it very broad at the beginning, that the entire file must be provided. But then I'm kind of hearing conflict, I just need some direction, whatever you
Yeah.
decide.
Well, I'm really struggling with that, because I don't understand how you can expect the board to make a decision on edited information. How can this board make an honest decision when some of the information is being redacted, some of the video may or may not be there? And I believe I heard somebody say that it would just be a summary of from a police officer as to what was in that video. And I do not see how we can give this board limited information and expect them to make the same decision, or not same decision, but a good decision on the information. I strongly disagree with not giving them every piece of information that the police used in order to come to their decision.
We do have to work within the boundaries of the law, though. And the Kansas Open Records Act has a provision for criminal investigation records, and sometimes information cannot be provided, and a court cannot order the city to provide certain information if it has to do with certain victims, ongoing criminal investigations, if it would interfere with any prospective law enforcement action. There are a number of exceptions.
Well, shouldn't that be listed in here?
We can certainly, we can take direction from you and list it if you don't agree with, if you would like us to change the sentence about the entirety language and then the language about
I just
actions.
would like to be more definitive.
And I think the Kansas Attorney General's office website has that list of exemptions. 'Cause I was actually looking at it earlier, and the one that pertains specifically to this, I think, is exemption 10. Is that
Yes,
right?
Criminal investigation records.
But the way that one, when I was looking through it, it read that unless ordered by a court. Is that right?
So the default in Kansas is that all records are considered open records, and then there are a number of exceptions. That you're referring to exception number 10, which is criminal investigation records. So any entity in Kansas can choose to not release criminal investigation records. Then the person who asked for that record could appeal to a court and say, we asked the city for this information, they won't give it to us. Judge, will you please make a decision? At that point, the statute works by saying, Judge, you have to release that to the person who asked unless one of these additional exceptions apply, and one of them is prospective law enforcement or criminal investigation.
I think listing those items would be helpful, and I think having a better understanding of what the IT abilities are,
Okay.
or the capabilities of gaining those abilities would be helpful.
I know this has taken a long time for us to get through this process for several months, but I just believe we have got to get this right the first time.
So if I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your direction. We'll check with IT to understand what capabilities they have, and then as far as language changes in the ordinance, you're asking us to change the sentence about redactions to specify the language in the Kansas Open Records Act and what types of information will be redacted. So you are wanting to limit what we put.
We've got two voices over here. I just want to check in.
My
Is there a
comment was
third-
just to clarify what
Is there a third
the state attorney general
in support of
says.
this? I mean, is that where you want to be, Leslie?
I'm listening.
Okay, well, I mean, what Maria's asking for direction here. We have a couple ways we can go. We can approve this ordinance, the second reading. We can essentially defer for more information about the IT and other language. Or we can just, do we want to defer? Do we want to go ahead with the ordinance? I believe we have two voices over here. I'm hearing say you want to defer for,
I would like to
Further
see the text of
consideration.
the languages there.
okay. No, you're not, actually, I'm sorry. We're having discussion up here at the.
If the other commissioners are open to deferring, that's fine
Okay.
with me.
So
We
I'm,
waited 2 years, so
yeah, I'm,
I guess another few weeks.
okay.
How quick
So,
of a turnaround could we get on this?
yeah,
Well, this won't take very long. It's just, we could put it on the
Okay.
next city commission
So-
meeting if there's room for it.
we need an action meeting, not a study session.
I put it on a regular agenda.
Right, a regular agenda, so what would be the next regular agenda that we do?
June 19th.
2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks from tonight. So you'd be able to do this 2 weeks from tonight?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, I would entertain a motion that would then essentially provide the direction that Maria and staff need to be able to.
Is there anything else that we need to discuss about
That's a
this
very good
ordinance,
question,
though,
yes.
Before we go on?
Before we go off on that. And
I'm sure that the legal staff has looked at it, but this is less of a discussion item for this group and more for the attorneys. But since the last time we had a meeting on this issue, it hasn't been that long, but since that time, there was a court case out of Superior Court in Newark, New Jersey, I think it was. And I realize that has no jurisdiction over us, but the Superior Court out of Newark, Judge Kessler, I think it was, found that citizen review boards could not have any subpoena power, which obviously ours do not. But he also, what made it kind of a big deal, a newsworthy deal, is in his decision, he also talked about that they could not have investigatory powers. And so that's a very broad word, that ultimately, if we're viewing tapes, are we doing an investigation? Or is investigatory mean we step outside the meeting and actually conduct our own interviews, which
No.
obviously
Right,
is a
yeah.
totally different
That's
bag.
There's
And-
specific language in here that
Right.
says they
And I
can't
just,
do their
I just want to bring that
investigations.
up to make sure that we've looked at that. And, the last thing I want, like you said, Commissioner Larson, we got to get this right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That the worst thing I think that could come out of this is if we issue this ordinance and 10 minutes later we get it shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure that we've looked at this legally to make sure that what we're enabling the Citizen Review Board enables them to do a thorough investigation without having it be investigatory. Does that make sense?
But not allowing them to see tapes, I can't fathom that being their own investigation. They've got to see the tapes, if they're there.
Yeah, I guess
don't
I
think
see
that's-
this more as a review than an
It's exactly what
investigation.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. It's
Just
the-
wanted to clarify.
Okay, was there anything else that we want, any other direction that we wish to provide staff on this? Okay, so again, I'd come back to requesting a motion that would capture your interest and provide direction to staff.
I would move that we defer on the second reading of ordinance 9324 pertaining to a community police review board, with direction to staff to review 12504B2 to address specific exemptions for redaction from the file, as well as looking into the IT capabilities of the Lawrence Police Department to currently redact video and audio footage, and or to gain the technology in order to do that and insert language addressing such in B2 as well.
I thought it was the legal department that did the redactions,
We review the file and then we say what needs to be redacted.
and then the police
and
actually does it.
see what the statute says.
Well, actually, the Office of Professional Accountability Sergeant
Yeah.
does this,
OPA.
and it's reviewed
So-
by the city attorney.
So, but those redactions have to be approved in advance by the city attorney or her designee. To make sure that the redactions are consistent with state law.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Commissioner Ananda, second from Commissioner Soden. Any questions, clarification about this before we vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Maria. Sherry, we're good on that motion. You've got that, everybody understands. Okay. Thank you. Our second issue tonight is to receive a presentation from BBC Research and Consulting regarding the housing study.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Heidi Egler with BBC Consulting and Research is here this evening to provide you an update with regard to the housing study. You'll recall that the city is contracted with BBC for this comprehensive study. Along the way, Heidi and her staff, her team, have been visiting with a number of stakeholders, including have had several discussions with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board to include a quite a lengthy afternoon session that was just held yesterday. And so Ms. Egler is going to provide a brief for you this evening on where the study is, and a little bit of an update too with regard to what the Affordable Housing Advisory Board discussed yesterday. And then the next steps after this, she is planning on putting together the final report, which will be shared with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and then would come back to this body for formal adoption. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi. Welcome, Heidi.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the
There's a button you can, is that as high as it goes, or?
No.
We can raise that a little bit.
Just a little bit, Heidi. Can't leave that. Okay, if you want. Or you can, it might be upsized to show a little bit higher. Perfect. So if you want to move it up or down, it's just.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me a little better now? Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here to talk about our progress on the housing market study, as well as our deliberations with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and which we had a very nice afternoon yesterday talking about the findings, as well as reviewing solutions and strategies to help you meet your needs. I'm going to brief you on our primary findings, talk about recommendations, and then, as Diane suggested, discuss our next steps. This study had two main areas of focus. We did an assessment of housing needs, which is largely mining data and analyzing data and looking at where your market is, focused on availability, affordability, and then calculated where your unmet needs are, what we call a gap. We also did an extensive community outreach process. We did a number of residence surveys, both online as well as a random sample survey that has a level of statistical significance. We surveyed students at KU. We interviewed and surveyed employers, landlords, and we did focus groups with representative stakeholders. Those stakeholders represent people who have needs in the community. And we're in the process of developing recommendations and a strategic plan. So a bit about your demographics. Your population's at about 100,000. Your growth was actually the strongest in the 1990s. You're on pace to have a similar number of residents added in this current decade, but your growth will still remain the strongest in terms of proportional growth between the 1990 and 2000 decade. Your share of renters and owners has not changed much over the last 15 years, and neither has your household or family composition. So we're a pretty stable community demographically. Other than your age distribution, not a whole lot has changed since 2010. We have observed a decline in 20 to 24-year-olds. Your main demographic change is aging seniors, so baby boomers aging into their senior years, consistent with what we're seeing in many areas in the country. About 1 in 10 Lawrence residents report having a disability. That equates to about 10,000 individuals. 30% of them are seniors. Your most common disabilities are cognitive as well as physical. We typically see physical higher than cognitive. Independent living, meaning people need some kind of assistance to live in their home. The city has substantially more owners earning over $100,000 today than in 2000, a 27 percentage point increase. This is unique to owners, so renters have not realized the same increase in incomes. You do, however, have fewer renters, fewer poverty level renters, so renters earning less than $25,000. We're not sure if that's because people left the community, if they were displaced out of their rental housing and chose to leave the community, or if they moved up an income bracket. Your poverty, when we compare your poverty rate to the state as well as to other communities in Kansas, it's about average, and that's after adjusting for the student population. Students look like they are living in poverty in our data, so it's important to adjust them out. So typical data that you see will show your poverty rate is higher than it actually is. This shows the numerical change by income bracket as well as tenure, so ownership and rentership. And you can observe here how there's been a shift in owners who are earning less than $50,000 into upper income brackets and fewer renters earning less than $25,000. I'm going to talk a little bit about housing affordability, but start with how we define affordability. The federal definition says, this is the current operating federal definitions, this is up for some debate within HUD right now, that households who are paying more than 30% of their gross household income toward housing costs are what we call cost burdened. And that would be income not excluding taxes, so that's the amount that comes to you before taxes and childcare and transportation are taken out. And it also includes utilities. And for a mortgage, your housing costs would include property taxes as well as mortgage insurance. Severely cost-burdened households, there's households that are paying 50% or more for their housing. And those are the households we really worry about because they're at risk of homelessness typically. This graphic here just simply presents the evolution of housing programming at the federal level. And I would simply describe this as the federal government used to be very paternalistic and controlling, if you will, in its provision of housing. So the federal government for a long time placed people in housing through the public housing program. In the 70s, and there was a devolution of that power, and the federal government chose to give block grants to states as well as cities to be able to make decisions about how to house people. And all of these programs, these block grant programs, were passed under Republican presidents. It started with CDBG, which you all received directly in the 70s, and then those block grant programs have continued since then. The most recent activity around housing has been under fair housing. There was a Supreme Court ruling in 2015 that found that disparate impact was part of the Federal Fair Housing Act, and that's changed the way that we as housers think about housing. Generally, housing is considered more than just housing now. It's looked at as opportunity to access good schools, jobs, and transportation. So the placement of housing has become, as well as the types of housing that is provided, has become a topic of much discussion in recent years. The primary programs that are delivered to help people meet their housing needs take a variety of forms. Basically, you can provide subsidies to people, either to pay their rent or buy a home, or you can build that type of housing. And there are a number of federal programs as well as state programs that facilitate creation of these different solutions. I wanted to point out how critical it is that the private sector is part of the discussions and partnerships in housing solutions. The private sector plays a very large part in housing delivery, as you are well aware. In your community, for low-income renters, however, these individuals are primarily housed through publicly subsidized program. Your market's shifted so much that the private sector is not providing a lot of housing, if any, for people who are earning less than $25,000 a year at this time. We get asked a lot, why do we have affordable housing needs? Why is it so hard to solve these problems? And I think about this a lot and have a number of reactions to this question that I get all the time. The physical development of housing lags behind the factors that create demand. So it's easier for people to move into a community than for communities to build the housing to accommodate them. I would argue that the federal government and many state and local governments have had inconsistent philosophies on how to address housing needs, so there's been a lack of consistency or strategic planning over time. Housing is often driven by other policy goals, primarily at the federal government. And then housing is very dynamic. It involves interest rates, construction, labor costs, in-migration, demographic shifts. All of those we put together in understanding your housing needs and coming up with solutions. When we talk about income categories, we typically use HUD's categories that are driven by the median family income. So annually, HUD calculates the median family income for communities and then sets categorical thresholds based on that MFI. 0 to 30% is generally considered poverty level families. Those individuals they're typically renters. Some are living on fixed income and are owners. They typically need subsidized rental or assistance to be able to pay their rent. If they're owners, they're generally seniors living on fixed incomes. They may need some home modifications to be able to remain in their homes and age in place. 30 to 50% are individuals who are generally renters, but may be able to achieve home ownership through land trust products, so very deeply subsidized ownership products. 50 to 80% is when we start to think about ownership a little more actively. Some of these individuals also need subsidies to be able to achieve home ownership. And 80 to 120% is when you start to think about your target for home ownership. And these individuals in some markets can buy without assistance, but in others do need some assistance. And you're kind of on the cusp of that here. A bit about your current housing costs. We calculate your median rent at $850 a month. We are seeing that not only in the survey, but also in market data, so we feel pretty good about that number. Students pay more, and oftentimes students pay on a per room basis, so their household median rent is higher than that $850. Seniors pay less. We asked people in our survey what they pay in their mortgage. The median was $1,500 a month. Seniors pay slightly less because they bought their homes earlier. And your median home price right now, so homes that are listed for sale or have sold in the last 6 months, it's about $250,000. Your gross rent is higher than surrounding communities, but for Manhattan. Your median list price is lower than surrounding communities, including Manhattan. This graphic here gives you affordability trends since 1998. It's pulled from secondary data that tracks housing prices. And you can see Lawrence is in the red. It's the red dark line there, kind of in the middle, that you've started to outpace some of the other communities. You've always been a little bit higher than the United States, than Topeka, than Wichita. But you're definitely... you haven't experienced the ups and downs that the United States has, but you're definitely on an upward trend and have been consistently over the last several years.
Can I ask you a quick question about
Sure.
the previous slide? When you look at the current housing costs by region, I understand that you were just focused on Lawrence, but when I saw this slide, what caught my attention is obviously Lawrence and Manhattan are comparable in terms of two major college communities in the state of Kansas, but when you look at median list price, there's a significant difference between Lawrence and Manhattan, and yet Manhattan's rental rates are higher on less valuable property. Do you have any conclusion as to why that might be?
It's a very good question. I don't know, having not studied Manhattan's ownership market, why that would be.
Okay.
You have a very, very low inventory of homes for sale right now, and we need to compare Manhattan's to yours.
But I suppose where I was going with, I understand why the 260 number is higher. I guess what I'm asking there is then, are we not seeing that list price of a home reflected in higher rents? Because one would assume as the list price of a home goes up substantially, as it has in the last 2 years, that the rents would follow. Just
somewhat. In a market like yours and Manhattan's, where you have the student dynamic, it can play out a little bit differently depending on how the market's choosing to house students. And these data are from the census. We feel good about the median that we calculated out of our survey data, which was $850 for Lawrence.
mm-hmm.
I don't have comparable data for Manhattan, so the data could be slightly different today than what you're seeing there, or the sampling could be different, but it should be close enough.
Okay.
So I agree, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And we didn't have data for Manhattan for this graphic, so that it wasn't supplied, so we don't have trends for Manhattan. Talk a little bit about homeownership affordability yesterday, today, and in the future. This graphic here shows what households at different income levels could afford in 2001, 2018, and 2019. And the big story here is the impact of interest rates. In 2001, interest rates were much higher. Households could afford less. We're at a point right now that very similar to 2017 and 2016 as well. Interest rates are remarkably low, enabling people to buy more house. That doesn't mean they can always buy a home, because as your prices have gone up, it means that you have to have a higher down payment to be able to buy those homes. Economists are saying in 2019, interest rates will potentially hit 5.5%, which then lowers the affordability for a household. So basically, your home prices are projected to go up, and the affordability is declining because of interest rates. This graphic here shows the median price by type of home, and this is for 2001, 2006, 2016, 2017, and year-to-date in 2018. What to pay attention to is the change here on the right. That shows the percentage increase in median value between 2001 and 2018. You can see that single-family detached homes almost doubled in value and had the strongest percentage point increase. Condominiums didn't increase a whole lot, so condominiums in terms of an affordable product have remained relatively stable. We took a look at what we're calling market demand indicators, so how many days it takes to sell a home and what proportion of homes are being sold for cash, as well as whether or not homes are being sold over the median. That first question, are homes being sold over the median amount, over asking price? That's not happening in your market yet. And when you see people outbidding each other, that's a sign of a market that's in quite a lot of crisis. So we're not seeing that yet, but you do have homes sold more for cash than what was current in 2001. And the median days on the market right here, the second to last row, only 8 for 2018. So very low on inventory. We're not seeing people outbidding each other yet, but we're seeing a lot of cash sales. We took a look at those cash sales, and they're predominantly in your lower priced units, so inexpensive condos and inexpensive single-family homes. We calculated the current choices for ownership by type and price. So if you were to look at the low-income row here, individuals who are earning between $57,000 and can afford a home price about $200,000, they had 200 homes to choose from. 70% of those were single-family detached homes, and 27% were townhomes. If I'm in the very low-income price range, I can afford basically only condos and townhomes. That inventory is pretty low right now, and a lot of those units are being bought by cash buyers. We asked survey respondents if they wanted to own, and if so, why, and what the barriers to ownership were. People who told us that they wanted to own was a majority of non-renters, individuals earning between $35,000 and $75,000. These people had relatively smaller households, were between the ages of 35 to 44, so what I would describe as your core workforce. We also asked if individuals wanted to move. Young adults and students said yes, we'd like to move. And individuals who had been here for a while or who were moderately aged seniors, families with children, said, I think I'll stay in my home. I'm not moving anytime soon. So where your market churns is in the students. Students move very frequently year to year, and that's where the movers occur. People who've reached their middle age and have established families tend to move less frequently. We calculated, started with calculating the owner gap. So what proportion of your renters earn less than 80% of your area median income or median family income? And it's a lot of them, 72%. If we looked at what they could buy in the market today, they could afford about 41% of your units. Most of those are condos and townhomes and some single-family homes. This is projected to be only about 30%, that affordability proportion, 30% of your inventory by 2020, if home prices continue to rise as we've seen them rise in the past 10 years. We believe, based on the survey data, you've got 2,000 to 3,000 renters who would like to buy, and they have about 250 units to choose from right now in the market. If we project forward to 2028, based on past housing price increases, we believe your median single-family home for sale could reach $375,000, townhome $240,000, and condos, which just aren't appreciating quite as quickly, $128,000. So that, coupled with rising interest rates, will put a little more crunch on your affordability. These series of maps here just show where affordable units are located, and we graph these for we map these for 2001 and 2018, and we map these at different home prices relative to where the median family income is and what interest rates were. We do this to see if there are any areas in communities that are completely unaffordable and see if affordable housing for sale, and we do this for rental as well, or is concentrated in certain areas. I'm just going to page through these. I'm not worried about your geographic dispersion. There are some nuances in some areas that aren't as affordable as others, but we don't see as much concentration as we might see in some communities.
Do you mean concentration of low income?
Not necessarily low income, but just low and moderate, I would say. So this is just units that are for sale, for purchase. So we're just looking at whether or not they're only available in certain parts of the community, and we don't see that as much as you might expect.
So none of these graphs really jumped out at you?
Not relative to what we see in other areas. And the one thing I would note about these two is these graphics are just showing the units that are affordable in that band, in that affordability band. So you could also buy down, if you will. You can afford more than what's pictured in that particular map. We're just placing people in their affordability band for the purposes of these graphics. So let's move into talking about rental gaps. What we do when we calculate the rental gap is we're looking not at proportions that are affordable, but actual units. So we take households and their income range, we compare what they can afford with what's on the market, and the gap is that difference. So if you look at the rental gap under 2016, what that shows is households who are paying more than what they can afford in rent. And that gap goes away at approximately the $20,000 to $25,000 income bracket. It doesn't mean that these individuals are homeless. What it means is that they're paying a lot more for their rent than what we would like them to, and therefore they're not able to invest in the local economy. We also ask why people cut, or what they have to do if they cut back to afford their housing costs, and many of them withhold or forego medical expenses. They don't go out to eat as much. They may not send their children to activities during the summer, for example. So people are definitely making trade-offs to be able to afford to rent here. Your rental gap, your cumulative rental gap is 5,200 households. Those are households who are housed but are paying more than what we'd like them to be paying. If you didn't have the inventory of publicly subsidized housing that you have right now, your gap would be 6,600 households. So publicly subsidized housing.
Do you have that data somewhere in here regarding what what they choose to forego? Is that
we
data?
do, yeah. It's
Okay.
actually in our survey data. There's a pretty extensive analysis of that in the survey. So you might ask, how does this gap compare with 2000, and why is there a difference? Your gap was really small in 2000. It was less than 2,000 units. Now you're at 5,200. And the main reason is that renters earning less than $20,000 a year, they had 56% of your rental inventory to choose from, and now it's down to 6%. Those units haven't gone away, they haven't been demolished, but they've moved up to the affordability range for renters earning $25,000 to $35,000 a year. So your market's shifted up a couple of income brackets as rental market has moved in most parts of the country, and that's taken affordability away from your very low income households.
I have a question. When you talk about these, the earnings, like less than 20 to 25, are those $2,000 and $2,000 or 2016, are they adjusted at all?
No, that would be, yes, it would be adjusted, and those would be current as of 2016. That's the latest income data that we had for the gaps. We compare that with the survey data to make sure that we're not too far off.
Okay.
So we talk to stakeholders a lot about the needs, and we do that to make sure that our data are representing what's really going on in the market. They told us that affordable, accessible housing, so accessible meaning people with disabilities have their needs met within their housing unit. It's extremely difficult to find. Many seniors are overhoused but may not be in ideal homes because they don't have accessibility improvements. And the accessibility requirements of the Fair Housing Act, they're inadequate, meaning that the Fair Housing Act requires accessibility improvements for a certain proportion of new developments, but those units don't have to be affordable. So in many markets, we see developers are building accessible units, but people who don't have disabilities are occupying those units. Transitional housing is needed for domestic violence survivors and youth aging out of foster care. There's not a lot of places to go if you're in that situation and you can't afford your housing. And housing plus supportive services are needed for persons with mental illness, as well as all types of people that are hard to house. So people who have had chemical dependency in the past, may have some cognitive disabilities or challenges. They're difficult to house because landlords are reluctant to offer units to them. We looked a bit at the student effect, as we should in a community like Lawrence, to see how students are affecting the market and if they have needs. 44% of students said they get help from their parents for rent, so they have some income stream through their parents that somebody who's naturally low income would not. Students are frequent movers, I mentioned that earlier. 50% said they live in apartments, 14% in single-family homes, and 9% in attached housing. And only 6% of students had to move in the past 3 years against their wishes. So when we think about displacement, we ask people if they'd been displaced, what happened, if that was against their wishes. Students are not in that category in terms of experience a lot of displacement. We're seeing that more with families with children. So a bit about our engagement process. We surveyed a lot of people. Our resident surveys totaled more than 2,000. We also had almost 400 landlords complete surveys and 57 employers. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the primary findings from those surveys. We have quite a lot of information that we'll be providing with you in the report that details all of the survey data. When we asked people the top 3 important factors in choosing their current home, cost was by far and above the reason people chose their home. Secondarily, size, number of bedrooms, location, neighborhood. Less important was close to quality schools or being in a certain district. We asked people if their homes were in fair or poor condition and why they hadn't made improvements. The top repair need was weatherization, and the people who said they have the highest repair needs are renters, large families, and families with children, followed by students. But renters above and beyond owners say they have repair needs, so they're living in housing that is in fair or poor condition. When we ask homeowners, there's only 8% of them who are living in poor condition housing. Why they haven't made repairs, they said they couldn't afford them. For renters, 57% said their landlords refused to make the needed repairs. Here's the cutback on what have you cut back on to afford housing costs. Entertainment, 56% of people said they had to cut back on entertainment. Others said, I received financial support from friends or family. I took an extra job. I avoided medical treatment. I cut back on my kids' activities. Those are the primary ways people make ends meet when they're dealing with high housing costs. And in terms of students and seniors, we see a little more ability for seniors and students to manage their increased housing costs because of equity they already have built in their home, reliance on families and friends. This is the displacement slide. We ask people if they have been displaced. Our question is, have you had to move out of a home when you didn't want to? The highest proportion came from renters with children as well as seniors and large family renters. So you definitely see a consistent theme here with displacement as well as living in substandard housing for families with children and large households. We asked why you had to move when you were displaced. Families with children said their rent increased or utilities went up. For all residents, it was primarily personal reasons. We don't worry about that as much as people who have been displaced because they couldn't pay for rent. A couple highlights from the landlord survey. Most of the landlords who participated in our survey are what we call ma and pa landlords, so small landlords, community landlords. 52% of them said their rental units go in less than a week. They get about 3 applications per unit. So one of the things that we worry about in hot markets is that renters are submitting applications that they know will never be acted upon because landlords can receive so many applications per unit. We're not worried about that in your market. We do see plans to increase rents. Landlords offered some policy solutions, such as seeing the 3 unrelated rule change to 4 unrelated, and some are concerned that the rental market's being overbuilt. That's not a concern of ours, given where your vacancy rates are and the type of housing that's been being built to accommodate the rental market is largely student-focused.
Do you think the student population is driving rents up?
I think it's a combination of the student population as well as in the global investor activity in the rental market. The rental market's shifted. It's a very hot commodity right now for investors, and we're seeing rents go up in communities that wouldn't have the same level of demand to rise up costs.
But you think that the students do drive rents up
I
here?
would say in your market and as well as any market, absolutely. Any market with a large student population drive costs up. And some of that is the new products that students are occupying. So young people are occupying they're a very amenity-driven population and occupying luxury units. The per bedroom or kind of the dormitory style private sector housing also raises costs. These types of developments are not built for lower income individuals necessarily, or low income families, and so it also raises that market, that segment of the market, because there's a higher demand created in that segment as well, so those sub-segments. So they're intertwined, definitely. We took a look at the cash activity in your market too relative to the country, and it's about average, a little below average. What we're seeing in the United States overall is foreign investors in all types of housing, as well as just investors in general. So the real estate market's a very popular way to make money right now. We ask employers if it's easy or difficult for employees to find housing to rent. 38% said difficult. Nobody said very difficult. Housing to buy, they did say very difficult. And 1 in 5 employers have had trouble recruiting employees due to housing conditions. So in summary findings, your growth right now is on pace to replicate the last big surge population. Your biggest demographic change will be aging of young seniors, consistency in middle-aged families, so you have a lot of stability in one side of your market, a lot of churn in the other side of the market, which also promotes rising rents. So there's that dynamic as well. I'm not sure what will happen with your outmigration of young adults. It's a little bit of an odd phenomenon to see a decline in 20 to 24-year-olds. I suspect it's because you don't have as many, your job market's a little smaller, a little more compact than what you'd see in an urban area. Rising prices have hurt renters the most, including low and moderate income renters who want to buy. Students have the better ability to adjust, families with children, not so much. And owners are doing pretty well in your current market, particularly higher income owners.
You make the statement that 1 in 5 employers have had trouble recruiting employees due to housing conditions in Lawrence. Are you able to further break that down and talk about, they're finding it difficult for employees to buy homes, or are they finding it difficult for employees to rent homes?
You know, I'm not sure, and I'd need to look. Our employer sample, well, actually, we did have that. We had a little bit of that right here. This is the housing to rent or housing to buy distinction. These numbers are pretty small, though. We had 57 employers respond to the survey, which isn't unusual. Employers are not active survey takers when it comes to housing surveys. So even though you see some pretty big percentages here in the housing to buy, it's still a pretty small sample.
And that's why I'd asked that question. I was wondering if that 0% very difficult indicates that companies are having trouble with employees buying housing, but not with renting, as 0% cited it as very difficult.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it would be the perception of employers is that their workers are needing to commute because they can't buy in Lawrence, so they're probably commuting from outside or living in areas that they would living further away than an employer would prefer they live.
Okay.
They're just more cognizant of that. Talked a bit about the cash purchases as well as the gap between renters who want to buy and what's on your market right now. The rental market is definitely affected by students for all the reasons that we talked about, as well as parental contribution to rents. In our opinion, the private market does a good job of responding to students' demands. There are students who have needs, but they're not as severe as non-students who are low income. And we believe your market's weak in what we'd call emerging products. So products that accommodate special needs residents, younger workers, attached homes, affordable condos and townhomes, patio homes for seniors who want to downsize, as well as larger families.
I didn't see what you were defining a large family.
You know, typically the census defines a large family as 5 people and more and greater. We use that as well. But, you know, sometimes we'll see a market like yours that's very oriented towards, I guess I wouldn't cut that off real dramatically. You'll see a market like yours that's oriented towards students be difficult for even a family of 4.
So a large family is a family definition including children, then not necessarily, you know, older people living together, like brothers and sisters.
We wouldn't segment it, we wouldn't cut it off that way. So we look at household size, and I'm using family very loosely, not defining that as a family as one might think of a traditional family. So we're just simply looking at number of people, 5+ who are telling us that they have housing needs. So where we are in terms of recommendations, Diane talked about where we are with the report. So we're finishing up the analysis in the next couple weeks, and we'll come to you with a draft report very soon. Most of our work is around the survey data analysis and completing that. We've got a lot of graphs and charts that we need to complete before it becomes a full report. My colleague Jen Garner and I have had 3 meetings with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. We've presented the survey findings, we presented much of the market data that you saw today, and then yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about solutions. We also presented information yesterday and discussed with the AHAB support for different types of products in your community, which is very strong for alternative products, attached housing throughout the community. We went through an exercise where we talked about what successful outcomes would be. So rather than go through a need-by-need discussion, we stepped back and said, if you were to report back to the Lawrence community in 5 years, what would you be proud of delivering? What would be a successful outcome given the needs that we've talked through? And so we spent a number of hours talking through successful outcomes and what solutions you all could employ to achieve those successful outcomes. And these were the outcomes that the AHAB developed from our discussion yesterday that then will be linked to solutions and goals for meeting these outcomes. Workers in Lawrence can live in Lawrence was by far and above the most highly chosen outcome by the AHAB. Low and moderate income renters can become owners if they desire and if they're qualified. And I would add a caveat, in our survey data, we don't go through that qualification process. Obviously, we're not lenders, we're simply asking people if they would like to buy. We talked a lot about what kind of ownership products may be missing from your market and could accommodate ownership between the $35,000 and $75,000 income level. And those would include land trust homes, cooperative or shared housing, condos and townhomes, as well as affordable single-family detached homes. There's a desire to reduce the gap between affordable rentals and the number of households who are earning less than $25,000 a year who need those rentals. Your gap right now is at 5,200. We project that that's going to go up with the continued loss of affordable units, not loss as in demolishing, but movement into higher income categories. And so to stabilize that rental gap is a successful outcome that was identified yesterday. Housing that has supportive service options for persons transitioning out of homelessness or at risk of homelessness was another top identified outcome. Persons with disabilities have more options for housing that is accessible and affordable and facilitates independent living if they wish. And seniors can age in place. We also talked a lot about leverage, about public and private partnerships, about how to leverage resources that are existing not only here, but in the broader community at the state and federal level to be able to meet these goals. And achieving an economic impact with these investments as well as leveraging other resources was another successful outcome discussed. We also came up with our conclusion yesterday, we came up with a dashboard. So what would be a way to measure these investments and the impact of these investments over time? What would be a desirable dashboard to keep track of for the city? And the AHAB concluded that reducing the rental gap, increasing purchase options for low and moderate income renters, increasing the number of transitional vouchers with supportive services, increasing accessible units through new construction as well as rehabilitation, facilitating the innovative partnerships that I talked about, leveraging other resources, and achieving both social and economic impact are desirable outcomes that should be measured over time. So with that, the next steps, or for us to finish up the report, we will have a number of recommended solutions that we started to talk through with AHAB yesterday that they're thinking through that are linked not only to the needs but to achieving those successful outcomes. And we have long-term and short-term solutions that we will recommend. With that, I'll take additional questions.
I have a question. I was curious to know, perhaps it would be considered more of a solution, but the loss of affordable housing to, like you were saying, it goes up the bracket. I'm surprised that that's not part of the successful outcomes, is stabilizing perhaps what's currently affordable housing to not become unaffordable.
Yeah, and that's actually captured within the reduction in the rental gap. So if you think about how you would achieve that, you either build more units that are permanently affordable, or you have a greater ability to provide subsidies to renters whose units are moving up that affordability category.
Yeah,
So it
I'm
would be a
thinking in terms
two-pronged
of
effort.
gentrification of current housing. So there may not be necessarily a change to a home, but the value of it will accelerate quite a bit. If there's any way to stabilize what's affordable now from shooting through the roof.
Yeah, we typically talk about that in preservation terms, and I think there's a very active and ongoing debate right now nationally about how do we achieve that, because there's typically not a lot of resources to deal with preservation. There's also this tension between allowing the private sector to be able to make a return on their investment, and we talked about this from the homeowner's perspective quite a bit yesterday, what do we expect homeowners to be able to realize? Should you be able to double your investment over 5 years? Is that acceptable? So where the preservation piece would fall would be in, we talked a lot about innovative solutions, acquiring units, condominium complexes that are aging, or apartment complexes that are aging. And we're seeing a little bit of this activity in urban markets now. Acquiring those, a city can acquire those, a land trust can acquire those, restricting those units so that they become permanently affordable, and you can either rent those or make those available to homeowners through a land trust model. So that's a good way to achieve preservation, but it's a little bit. It doesn't really stem that movement as much as maybe markets need.
I guess what I'm wondering is if it's something that's already in here is looking at preservation, or if it's something that perhaps needs to be added.
I would say preservation falls under, would be a subcategory in many of these solutions.
So it sounds like the churn of property and sales, that is, plus with the students driving up the rents, really, those are the two things that have a severe impact on our affordability. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I also think, just the market in general, the national movement to, I think that there's a lot of head scratching around why has the rental market gone up so much across the board in markets where we wouldn't expect it to, which I believe is very investor driven. We are in a situation right now in our country where renters don't have a lot of purchasing power because their incomes haven't risen as fast. And so they don't have a lot of choice other than to tolerate rent increases.
Mhm. I know that one thing that I kind of struggle with here as a commissioner is if we're adding units, then you would think that that would have an impact on increasing affordability, but it doesn't seem to have had that impact at all.
As long as you're in an area, you know, so when you step back and think about what areas are affordable and what are the market dynamics that those going on to cause those areas to be unaffordable, and it's really a lot of that can be explained by demand. If you're a nice community, you probably always will be. You have a you're a beautiful community, you're a very high demand community. And the way to think about adding those units is where would we be if we hadn't added those units? So we had a lot of discussion yesterday about there's no silver bullet. There's no way that we're going to make every need go away, but we can do a lot. And if we didn't do anything, what would the market look like?
So it sounds like adding units is just really way too simplistic.
Unless you really flooded a market with units. And where we saw that in Denver, where I'm from, it was in 2004, we hit about a 15% vacancy rate. So we built a lot of units, we didn't grow. There was a lot of out-migration for a variety of reasons. And that's when the private market units got so affordable that it actually put public sector or publicly subsidized providers out of business. And so it's a pretty extreme situation, an unusual situation.
What did you say was you said, you made a statement earlier about given our current vacancy rate. What is that number?
It's about 2%. It goes up and down, obviously, with your students, but and that's where you've been always very low. So you're definitely under 5%, which is what most economists think is a reasonable vacancy rate.
That's for rentals?
For rentals.
Okay, so you would say a 2% is reasonable then?
2% is low. 2%
Okay,
is very low.
that's what
Yeah, 5% is the rate at which the market, there's not, huge inflation in prices, the market, people can move around the rental market freely. Find units.
So how did you determine that number?
The 5% or the 2%?
2%.
The 2%. So the vacancy rate, we typically rely on the American Community Survey to determine, and then we take a look at it in the gaps modeling that we do to see if it's accurate. And where where the vacancy rate's important for us is when we do that gaps modeling, so we're comparing households to rental units, we want to make sure that we're getting that supply about right, the supply and demand comparison about right. And it doesn't have to be a precise number, but we want to make sure that it's not, our numbers aren't so far off that we're misrepresenting your gap. You've been consistently so low that it's not something that I worry about.
I thought earlier you talked about us being overbuilt, but yet our vacancy rate is only 2%.
That was a perception that people shared. And so if you look at your building permits, the way that you are building multifamily housing, it's very lumpy. You have a lot of units go online and then nothing, and a lot of units go online and then nothing's built. And so my perspective is that's a fear when you see a lot of units come on, and it's very cyclical, and it's a reaction to maybe something really big being built, and there's some worry, and then it softens when the market adjusts.
Thank you.
And when the report comes out, will you break down that vacancy rate based upon the different types of housing, or we're talking about apartments versus single-family detached versus condo versus townhouse?
We do not have the ability to do that because we didn't survey the providers of those units to the extent that we could. We did collect, we have a lot of Craigslist data, so we're understanding what's on your market, what's active right now, but we don't have the full population of housing providers. Our landlord survey overrepresents small providers.
Okay. So I think a lot of that perception of overbuilding we hear about is with apartments.
Right.
And on the opposite end, when you talk about single-family detached, I think quite the opposite is true, that we're massively underbuilt. So it'd be interesting if that was able to be broken apart, but.
So typically to do that, and you see that generally in large urban areas where there's an ongoing apartment association that runs a vacancy survey frequently. And even those data are a little bit, there's quite a margin of error with those data. It's a hard, unless, those are hard data to come by, and it's something I wouldn't worry about a whole lot. I don't think your vacancy rate suggests that you will be overbuilt
Okay.
anytime soon.
Other questions? I think what I heard you say was that the home buyers at the lower income spectrum are being essentially in competition with investors who are paying cash for the lower, so we assume those are investment properties for rentals? Is that accurate?
Yes. We don't know a lot about why they're buying those units, but we believe they're investment properties for rental. You do see quite a lot of cash activity at your high income, for your high income home purchases too. And those would be individuals who, sold a home, made a lot of money, maybe from somewhere else, and came and decided to retire here or decided to make an investment here. So we actually see it on both sides. I'm not so worried about the $350,000 plus cash buyers. I worry about the other side of the market where it's really hard. Units are staying on the market for 8 days, and I've got this cash competition as well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's take some public comment on this issue.
Hi, my name is Paul Horvath. I've been a Lawrence landlord continuously now for 40 years, since 1978, and primarily in the core, what I would call the core area, East Lawrence, Ariad, Old West Lawrence. And I have attended some of the meeting there. What concerns me, you talk about preservation, and I would say that the majority of our older affordable housing stock in the core neighborhoods is at risk of being pushed out. And that's the trend that I've seen over the past, especially 10 years. Because what's happening is as buyers get more savvy and lenders get more savvy, they're concerned that a property is properly grandfathered in. So a lender will ask, on a potential sales, is property grandfathered in? They go to the city planning department. The planning department tells the property owner, you've got to show us that this property has been legal, conforming for the past, basically since 1920 or whenever the particular ordinance had an effect. So bottom line is majority. I feel comfortable saying that the majority of our low-cost, affordable housing in the older neighborhoods are at risk. As a landlord for 40 years, I've never really been concerned about the peripheral growth or expansion of apartments because we have a niche rental market for people that want to stay in the downtown area, live, work in the downtown area. So what I want to suggest and put a bugger in your ear is to grandfather in properly the older properties. As a landlord, just because I have a license for a rental property does not make it legal. The city at any point can decide that that property is not properly grandfathered in. So we need to look, I'd encourage you to look at an ordinance that would grandfather in these older properties that maybe have been operating for 50 or 60 years this way, but in the eyes of the planning department are not legal. And so eventually they're going to be forced out, forced to convert to a lower density. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question real quick?
Yes.
When you're talking about grandfathering, are you talking about houses that are pretty much turned into 2 or 3 apartments? Is that what you're referring to?
Primarily, yes,
Okay.
although it also affects single-family homes.
That need to be grandfathered in because
because of perhaps how they were built. They might have been built over setback lines or not properly. You know, the porch may extend out too far, or it affects single family as well as multifamily. But in this case, especially multifamily, because that's where your affordable housing is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Benita Yoder. Are you interested in preserving existing affordable housing units at virtually no cost to the city? If so, grandfathering multifamily units, as a previous speaker referenced, is a way to do that. I know of a situation where a house had 5 apartments. The owner received an email around the end of the year saying that only 2 rental licenses could be issued instead of the 5 that had previously been issued. Now, that particular situation involves about $2,500 a month mortgage payment for taxes, insurance, principal, interest. If you divide that by 2, you're going to have apartments that rent for $1,250 a month just to service the mortgage and expenses without any maintenance. These are 1-bedroom apartments. That isn't affordable. There's a resident in one of those apartments who's a Section 8 tenant who came into that apartment through a jail reentry program. She does not own a car, and this house is located within walking distance from downtown and 2 houses from a bus stop. She's able to take a bus to work at a local store as a cashier. She's also able to walk downtown to attend meetings at churches at night, which are part of her recovery program. Again, she does not have a car. She would like to renew. Does the owner renew or not? If she's displaced, she's going to have to find another apartment that's conveniently located so that she can take a bus to work and walk to her meetings. I attended a couple of these meetings with the Denver consultants, and I remember the Lawrence Housing Authority representative saying that 1-bedroom apartments were particularly hard to fill. Now, I've had an average of 3 to 4 Section 8 tenants the last several years. My experience is that most of my tenants in those times, I hesitate to say this on public record, but the majority of my tenants have either a physical disability, my Section 8 tenants, or mental health challenge, or chemical dependency that they're recovering from. Mayor.
Benita, your time is up.
Oh.
Thank you, Benita.
Rather than criminalize, why not incentivize? Say you can have these units if you have a certain percentage, Section 8.
Thank you.
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. At the corner of 9th and Kentucky, there are about, I don't know how many units that are vacant. They've been vacant for years. And one of them is used for storing furniture. And one house there has been under construction or remodeling since 1865, I think. But I don't know what's going on with the supply of housing like that. On the street where I live, about 2 doors away from me, there is a unit that has been unoccupied for about 5 years. Maybe not quite that long. There has been some work done on it, but I don't know what the status of it is. It could be a good place for a low to moderate income person or family to buy. But it's just there. And I think we're at the point now where we need to consider that rental housing is a public utility. And it needs to be managed like that. That would be a 3-member commission that would set rates for rentals and determine rates of return for landlords. I don't know, I don't see any good outcome if we just keep down the same road. Because are incomes increasing sufficiently to match rental rate incomes? I don't know. And you have to take one thing into account, which is what I call the non-data factor. And that is that rental properties in residential areas degrade neighborhoods. That's just, there are no data to prove it, but you can go and see, because I've done it. And it's happened in my neighborhood. And I don't like it, but there's nothing I can do about it, because we don't have very good code enforcement in this town. That's by design, from my perspective. And I think we need to really consider changing the model by which we regulate rental properties in this community.
Thank you, Dan.
KT Walsh, 732 Rhode Island. I just have a few questions for our consultant. I wonder if the students surveyed were just KU, or did it include Haskell, Indian Nations University, and Johnson County students, because presumably they would be lower income. So I just wondered if they were included in the mix. I know many cities have used the tactic for years of freezing property taxes for seniors so they can stay in their homes and not be displaced. I'm wondering if that's an option. How has it gone in other cities? There's a lot of people in, new subject, there's a lot of people in Lawrence who would like to see tiny houses be legal. And that has worked in other communities to help bring costs down. I know there are pluses and minuses with that. Using the word preservation is a little confusing. I wonder if there's another term we should use in this community. And lastly, I'm wondering if our consultants know how Airbnb and people who buy homes for Airbnb are affecting the housing situation, if not here, other places. Thank you.
That'd be fine.
So the first question is whether or not the student survey included students other than those who attend KU. The survey was open to any type of student. It was predominantly responded to by students who attend KU because of the marketing that the university did to promote the survey. Freezing property taxes for seniors is very effective in areas that have high property taxes. California is probably the best example. That we in Denver have a homestead exemption for seniors. We have relatively low property taxes, so I don't think that it makes as big of a difference as having like a home rehab program would to enable people to age in place. The tiny homes being legal, our understanding is that your zoning code accommodates a lot of the options to be able to do tiny home communities. I'm a member of the Denver Planning Board, and we have a group living subcommittee that's looking at emerging trends, and I'm very aware of the tiny home development that we have in Denver and some of those barriers. Austin, Texas has a more well-developed tiny home community. It's actually in Travis County. It's called Loaves and Fishes, and I would invite you to take a look at that. It has supportive services as well. It is a faith-based private-public partnership, I think, that developed that community, and it's one that is very successful and actually has an Airbnb component to it. So they do generate revenue through Airbnbs in the tiny homes village. We certainly included that in our solutions in an exploratory fashion. And finally, on the Airbnb question, we didn't look at that in particular in Lawrence's market. It really depends on the market, but yes, absolutely, Airbnb can have a significant effect on supply, predominantly in areas like San Francisco, although I would say there are other dynamics that are occurring in those very, very hot and high-priced markets. Airbnb certainly is not helping, but it's not the predominant factor that's causing housing prices to rise in those areas.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Frank Jansen, 38 New Hampshire. She mentioned Airbnbs. I live in a one-block street right near Central Junior High. There are at least 2 Airbnb houses. One of them that's like a whole house people will occupy. One on the other side of the street is a house with several like apartment blocks in it. I see people there all the time from out of state and different places. So I don't know how that affects the housing in Lawrence. Thanks.
Other public comment? Okay, bring it back up here.
Heidi, will you bring up the slide 36?
The counter, let's see.
Is that the homes and, I think that's the homes in fair or poor condition slide.
This one here?
Yeah, down at the bottom there, I can't read it from here. Is that the right one? Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at. Down at the bottom there, it says that 75% of homeowners haven't made needed repairs because they can afford them, and then 50% of renters have landlords who refuse to make needed repairs. I know that the term slumlord is kind of an issue here in our town. Do you have any kind of insight to that at all?
So just to clarify on those proportions, this is a question that was asked of people who said, we asked, is your home in, we asked them to scale the condition of their home, excellent, good, fair, or poor. And if you fell into that fair or poor, then we asked what repairs are needed, and then why haven't those repairs been made. So it's a subset of it's not the full survey, it's a subset of the survey respondents. We didn't do a condition assessment necessarily to understand, so this is all self-reported information. Condition data are really hard to get. They're not well represented in the census, and this is the best that we can do to get at condition issues. Even among renters, weatherization was one of the top needs, and so when you start to look at what repairs are needed, I feel like they are, you saw some drywall, some repairs that would feel like a unit was in really bad shape, but it was the minority of units. And I know that this was a discussion we had with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board too. They were surprised that the condition data, the self-reported condition data, weren't as severe as what one might observe or what the community perceives as being condition issues.
Yeah. Do you think there's any possibility that the people that might be living in those kind of units are afraid to fill out surveys?
Possibly. I think that in rental markets like yours, in very tight rental markets, people are reluctant to complain, particularly if they've been evicted, if they feel like they're at risk of homelessness. Immigrants, Spanish speakers, we see a lot of that in urban markets. Are very, very reluctant to report any condition issues. And so I believe that could have been a factor in this survey. When we did stakeholder focus groups, the conversation, and we see this in Denver as well, is mostly about supply, not necessarily condition, because the supply is so constrained. So that's top of mind. People are willing to tolerate a different condition than they would in a market where affordability wasn't such an issue.
That's the part that really concerns me, is the people that have the hardest time affording really anything. The bottom of our market are also the same people living in substandard conditions. So I don't know how we would get at that with what you're doing.
You know, honestly, if you sort of step back and think about what would make a difference if you had all the money in the world in a situation, in a hot market like this, and we worked in San Francisco last year. When you have condition issues, you've got displacement issues, you've got populations that that are hard to house, that need some supportive services, you want to control, and I don't mean my rent control, but control the inventory a little more. You want some type of a, you want to add inventory, and you want to ensure that those are quality units that are permanently supportive.
Right.
So if you could wave a magic wand, you'd love to build more subsidized housing, a range of publicly subsidized housing.
Thank you.
Okay, our issue is to receive the presentation from BBC Research and Consulting regarding the housing study.
So moved.
I think we've done that. Do we need to provide any further direction? Okay.
Do we need a motion?
I don't think we need a motion.
Thank you very much. I really like your report so far, and especially answering my painful questions that are very, very complicated topic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate your work and look forward to seeing you again. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Stuart.
the roads all be back open by 3:30 PM on that day. The other thing that the organizers agreed to do is come up with a comprehensive traffic control plan for access to parking downtown. They did submit something, but it wouldn't be what city staff would consider comprehensive enough to actually provide access. What they had presented to us was experienced personnel stationed at that access point. But as you can imagine, people, if they're not sure where to go, they won't actually come up to those people. And so we were looking for something a little bit better. We did coordinate with DLI. We had a meeting, their board meeting. Representatives from the Tour Lawrence came to the board meeting and talked. And ultimately, we, at the end of the day, came to an impasse. The downtown businesses have requested that the event be concluded and the roads back open by 12 noon. The organizers have said that there's just no way to have this event in its format that they want to have it and be done by then. So the timing is a 3.5-hour window that we're talking about. And based on all those criteria, staff felt that the most appropriate action was to deny this permit. They have asked you all to consider an appeal of that administrative denial. And I think both groups, DLI is here tonight, and I think there's a representative from the Tour Lawrence as well.
Okay. Questions, Mark? Don't hear it. Thanks, Mark. So perhaps the appellant will come forward and talk about your appeal.
Good evening, Mayor Boley and Commissioners. My name is Eric Strockoff, and I am the founding director and promoter of the Tour of Lawrence. Back in 2008, I had an opportunity to team up with City of Lawrence Convention and Visitors Bureau, my teammates, Free State Racing, volunteer groups in the city to put on an event that fundamentally transformed the experience of 4th of July in Lawrence, Kansas. Anybody cares to remember what was going on in 2008 and 4th of July? It was nothing. There was much more than the bike race, of course, involved with the Tour of Lawrence. There were food festivals, there were kids zones, there was music, and we tried to expand this event to something that was much more than just a bike race. I entered into this in the hope of providing I should mention now that I am not the appellant. I am helping with the promoter of the race now, Cindy Brocker, who couldn't be here tonight. But she's asked me as the founding director to advise her, and I entered into the Tour of Lawrence with the hope of putting on 2 very, very good events, and we had a third one, the Street Sprints, which was kind of a novelty, but my goal was to put on an event mainly on the KU campus. I had put on numerous events in the area, a couple of state championships and a few local races here, and I was trying to get an event on campus. We had an opportunity to team up with CVB at the time, and that opened some doors to cooperation with KU and the city that allowed us to put on a phenomenal race, especially on the campus, coupled with a tested and very popular championship level criterium course downtown that had been used in 2005 through 7 for the collegiate national championships. But to me, the attraction was the KU race. The 2 of them together really put this event on the map nationally. We attracted riders from across the country. I think we're probably about 5,500 to 6,000 riders over the course of the years that this event went on. I handed the event off in 2012 to Convention and Visitors Bureau and a new promotion group. I've only attended as a motorcycle referee in the meantime since doing that. The course downtown, the Tour of Lawrence is about its courses. It is about a very challenging, very scenic, fully closed, 4.5-mile, hilly, urban course on campus, which is in itself very unusual. Our course is so spectacular. People can't believe how much climbing there is. They want to come back and do it again. Our course, I've seen some numbers from USA Cycling recently that listed the attendance at that event. I'm not sure if they're correct, because I think the change between year one and year two, because of the impact, because of the spectacular nature of the courses, was greater than is shown in the most recent numbers I've seen. But I believe over the course, as I said, of 8 years, that event attracted 5,500 to 6,000 riders altogether to Lawrence. The downtown race is also about the course. It's a tested championship course, as I said, used in the national championships for collegiate racing, 2005 through 2007. It's one of the fastest, most wide open courses in the Midwest, and that's a big attraction for racers. As Mark mentioned, I should mention, Mark Thiel was a tremendous help to us in putting on the original events, as was so much of the city staff. We drove the courses together and found out what needed to be done downtown and on the campus course. The presence and the needs of the event actually helped move some needed street repairs ahead. I'm thinking in particular of Missouri Street and some of the small patches done on 8th and Vermont, for instance. So there were benefits as that as well. We understood there was disruption to downtown. It's inevitable. But over the years, we worked as an event to reduce the amount of disruption year by year, condensing races, compressing the schedule, improving the setup and takedown time to build and remove the courses. Because, let's face it, the disruptions that occur with an event this size are very real, and those are legitimate concerns, and we did our best to address those on a year-by-year basis to try to improve. The schedule that Cindy has proposed, this is not it. It is a 3:30 finish. 3:45, I think, is actually when it would finish according to her schedule. Is shortening still of that schedule and of that disruption in recognition of those very real concerns of downtown merchants. But I'm here to ask you to approve, to reverse the denial, because I think that she will be able to bring this event back to something similar to what it was before. When I handed off this event in 2012, we had a very successful, fully staffed, turnkey event that I handed off, essentially. I'm not sure what happened in the shakeup in the last couple of years with the event. We've had some construction on KU. We've had events at Haskell. They've been successful, and they've been well attended. But this year, Cindy is starting out a little bit late, but she's also not, she does not have access to all the support that I had from, say, transit guest tax that we had back then. She will intend to apply for that. Like I said, we had great support from the city, from KU, and we work close with fire and medical, of course, to ensure rider safety, and with police and streets to ensure access to alleys, parking, and with an experienced crew of volunteers and marshals, we were able to make sure that access was preserved to the garage. We would still be able to do that. I think that, yes, it is important to understand that there is disruption that goes on with an event this size. There's no doubt about it. We acknowledge that. But we should also acknowledge that we have 324 new parking spaces downtown in the last couple of years with a new Vermont Street garage, which is fully accessible during a road closure for this race from Kentucky Street. That is more spaces than are blocked off en masse altogether for the race. There are about, I think, 240 spaces en masse that would be blocked off by this event on 3 blocks. There are 324 spaces in that garage. So conditions now are better than ever. We have better transit. We have fewer people driving. Sometimes we have more people interested in going downtown and going to their destinations by foot and by bike. And that should be the message. The message should be conditions are better than ever for parking downtown, even if we do have an event down there. That's what we should be saying to people who would come down and shop, is that come down. We have all those spaces that are gone en masse. They're a half a block away, well, a short 1 block away on Vermont. And that event, that garage will be fully accessible. So I would like to, I can't speak for Cindy As I said, I'm merely been asked to advise her. I think that she would still be interested in working on further compromises about time and arrangement of races. There's not much more room in the schedule to do that, because one of the important things about attracting people to an event like this is to get more of them, you have to have races for every category. Races are broken up into races by skill level, experience, age, and those people, for reasons of rider safety and competition, are put into separate categories, the ones you see here. She is doing her best to consolidate those even further, again, in the interest of minimizing the time that the street is shut down. Our last race, I think, in 2009 started after 7 o'clock. And year after year, that time has gotten earlier and earlier. This year, her latest proposal is earlier still. So she recognizes the impact that this event will have on downtown, and the promotion group is trying to do the best to minimize that. There's no way you can have this race without disruption. That's certainly clear. But I think there has not been a major change in downtown, with the exception of the addition of lots of parking spaces. That would necessitate a change in the city's support for this event at this location. And so I would ask you to consider reversing the denial and approving the street closure.
Okay, questions for Eric?
Do you have a copy of the 3:45 race to provide, or in time, race in time?
You mean a schedule?
Mm-hmm.
I do not have the schedule with me. She has shown me a copy of it. I don't own a copy of it myself, but I've seen it, and her races are compressed to get that extra hour out of schedule. There is concern that some racers won't like racing with the group they've been put with, or that their races have been shortened too much, because if people are going to come, they want to have what they call a competitive race, one that's challenging. That means a certain duration. And so I think, she's compressed that about as much as possible. I'm not sure what else can be done with this schedule as far to conserve time, other than splitting it into, I'm just throwing this out here, I'm not speaking for anybody else, having an evening and morning competition, where a few number of races were held the previous evening, more were held the following morning, and that would end by noon. I don't know whether that would work, or whether she would be amenable to that, but I would suppose she would be amenable to discussing it further. For now, I think that the compromise, the further compromise down to 3:45 is, I think, a pretty good one from what we've had in the past. This event has shortened in duration year after year, for the reasons we've all discussed. And this is a pretty good compromise. I think but noon makes it impossible for this event to go on.
It looks like the race doesn't start till 8. Is that correct?
Till 8, the first one.
Could you
And
start
I
at
don't know, so somebody else may be able to speak.
Could you start at 6?
You could start earlier. I don't know how early, but that's something that could possibly be discussed. I don't know. I could race that early. I'm not sure what the general racing attitudes are these days.
You need daylight, right?
You need daylight.
What time is the sun up?
We've raced downtown at night. The
It's
first
up.
year we had it, first 2 years we had nighttime racing.
Okay, so you could do it 5 o'clock in the morning.
You can do it pretty early.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's the sun. We used to go to work at that time, so.
Projected sunrise that day is 5:59.
Thank you.
5:59. There you go. That's fine.
That's about all I could say. I mean, we acknowledge that not all businesses share in the benefits of these people coming downtown equally. That's a given. We understand that there is massive disruption. That's a given. I think the event has done a lot to make the compromises necessary to keep the disruption at a minimum, especially in the afternoon. And this is a 3-hour and 45-minute period that they're asking for at this point. That's less than half of what we started with. Thank you.
Thanks. Public comment on this issue.
Are we gonna hear from downtown Lawrence as well?
Public comment.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Ken Campbell. I am a downtown business owner. I have a letter here that was distributed and signed by a lot of other downtown businesses, and I understand it's been passed along to the city staff and by Sally from the downtown Lawrence. So you guys may have already seen this. It was distributed around after the street closure for the Final Four. We wanted to show that there was concerned businesses that to Chief Squires, because I understand it was kind of his decision to close it for that event. But the first and the last part of this letter are pertinent to any street closure, really, so I'd just like to read that to you. Please be advised that we all are truly thankful for the support that the city gives us in pursuit of our endeavors. We appreciate the Christmas lighting, the spring and summer flowers, festivals like the Busker Fest, and all the other varied programs and services. All that being acknowledged, we do have one very crucial concern, and that is the closing of Massachusetts Street for select special events for more than a couple of hours at a time. At the end it says, our real point is this: please do not close off Massachusetts Street unless absolutely necessary. Park-like activities should take place in our wonderful parks. If one looks up and down the street, one notices several vacancies. Closing off the street will only exacerbate the closing of more stores. If the street is full of vacancies, it certainly will lose its magical charm. I mean, if we continue to lose businesses, nobody's going to want to have an event downtown. You know, you look around the country at other downtowns and you see, you know, Blythe that isn't a place where anyone would want to gather for an event. So my business is in the 600 block. So when you close Massachusetts Street, there is no place to park close to the businesses down in that block. There's no off-street parking in the 600 block. So, you know, the parking places on Massachusetts Street are the golden spots. So just, you know, closing that and eliminating those spots is just really a bad idea.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Justin Jenkins. I live at 605 Stowe Court. I'm the pastor of Velocity Church. We've been in the community for coming up on 7 years. We are a portable church, which means we don't own a venue, but we meet at 2 venues in the city. One of those venues is the Lawrence Arts Center at 940 New Hampshire. I sent in a letter, but just wanted to make sure our position is clear. We would request that the denial that you guys already submitted is that's what you continue with and would not consider this appeal. We have 3 services, 2 of which are at the Lawrence Arts Center, 9 and 11 o'clock. Our services have over 300 people come to them. We also have over 70 volunteers to put on a service. Many of those get there at 7 o'clock to set up. So we've been there for every year that this has gone on. We've never had anyone contact us about this. The only way I heard about it was I got an email forwarded which said that 61% of the downtown businesses are opposed to the road closure happening for any length of time. Within that, the problem is, just with our volunteers getting there, with being portable, we have to set things up, haul things in, all sorts of gear. Also for people to park, typically the start and stop time the start and stop finish line is right at the Lawrence Arts Center, which impedes our parking ability. So it's impacted our ability to hold services, impacted our ability to host our guests who come in. But not even just us, it also impacts the other churches that are downtown, of which there are a number just with parking. So I would just request that you hold to your previous decision to deny the road closure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sophie Brocker-Sturm, 2611 Prairie Elm Drive. Hello, my name is Sophie, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the Tour of Lawrence. I've heard a significant amount of concerns about the blocking of streets, parking problems, etc., but the race committee has already come up with lots of solutions to these issues. And we've recently learned that not all of our solutions and compromise were decimated to the downtown businesses. A few businesses were concerned about the New Hampshire parking garage, and they thought that it wouldn't be used for food delivery and churchgoers, but this was all addressed in a comprehensive parking plan submitted by the race director Cindy Brocker on May 15th. The New Hampshire garage will in fact be accessible for parking, and the south entrance will be controlled by course marshals who will ensure safety of the race by directing cars entering and exiting the lot. Further, the Vermont Street garage with its more than 300 spots will also be fully accessible. Next, people are concerned that citizens will be unaware that downtown businesses are open due to the roadblocks, but personally, if I were a downtown business owner, I would be looking at this as a great opportunity for cross-promotion and marketing partnerships. This race is already receiving incredible attention on social media, and downtown businesses can take advantage of this buzz to encourage people who are coming to watch the race to also come into stores. So now you may be thinking, but how is this race going to benefit me, or more importantly, the city? Well, the Tour of Lawrence and Explore Lawrence teamed up and estimated the amount of racers that might be attending and how much money the city would make. And I'm very excited to announce that this race could bring up to 300 racers, make at least $60,000, and a maximum of $120,000 for the city. Now, not only is this all good for the city, but the race offers events for people aging from 9 to 70 years of age. If these points aren't convincing enough for you, then it's also going to be beneficial for high schoolers like me to get some volunteer hours in for National Honor Society. It also helps people get more involved in the community, and let's be honest, it'll get people out of the house for a couple of hours. The Tour of Lawrence has been a city tradition starting in 2009 that took a break last year. We want to bring back this exciting event because of its positive impact that it has had on the city. I volunteered for the race twice, and both times I've learned so much, met many great people, and honestly, I had a lot of fun. It's really important for people to get involved in their community, especially at a young age. Nowadays, the youth is too caught up in their electronics to help out in their society. Putting on this race would bring the community together, and I feel make us stronger. People from all around the states have come back to participate in this race because of the impact that our city has had on them. So, after hearing all of these compelling arguments, hopefully you have seen what you need to do. Please reconsider the street closure permanent application and let this bike race become a part of our wonderful city that is unmistakably Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is David Sturm, 2611 Prairie Elm Drive. I come to you tonight as president of the Kansas Cycling Association. We are the operative arm of USA Cycling, which governs bicycle racing in the United States, both here and abroad, at all levels of the sport. This race is amazing. The Tour of Lawrence is one of the first very large, or large at the time, bicycle races that I had the honor of volunteering at before I was involved with the KCA. And I was acting as a course marshal. I volunteered to make sure that people could cross the street safely, that cars could get in and out of where they need to get in and out of without causing accidents to racers and reducing the amount of disruption that was going on there. I went on to become an official, and I have officiated this race at the last year that it was held. And it was one of the best put on races I ever met. I had the wonderful opportunity to talk to racers and to people in other states, and everybody remembers this race, and specifically the downtown crit, as being one of their favorites that they've been able to race. We have a unique course. It's 8 turns. It's very, very fast. It's in an urban setting. Their support people that would come with them, that travel with them, loved being on downtown Mass, going into the shops, going in and spending money in the restaurants and the bars during and after the race. A recent study from University of Michigan averaged $121 per person per day that would come to one of these races. That's outside of housing fees and outside of race fees. That's just people spending money downtown. So they're already there and they're already spending money down there. Is there a disruption? Well, certainly there's a disruption. There's a disruption anytime you have a course like this. The proposed schedule that she has that shortens this to get off by 3:45 really becomes the smallest that you can really come to. The problem with it is that according to USA Cycling rules, there are minimum times. Otherwise, it's not a race. And so there are minimum times. When she is compacted some of these races, combine them appropriately because there are rules governing who can race with who because of skill levels. I don't want a professional racer racing with a Cat 5 guy who's on his first bike ever. That's a cause for an accident. It's not going to happen. And the rules don't allow that to happen. And all of that is codified within that. The proposal that she has that shortens this race really gets this down to the bare bones. It has to get rid of one of the great bits of it, which is the youth race, which is when little kids can come out in their striders and race down Mass, just like all their the guys that were going by at 28 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour, and they love that. But we have to get rid of that to compact that down to that. But that's a compromise that she's willing to do. I believe she just sent a copy of that. We got a text from her, so we can get that proposed up there. But thank you very much, and
Thank you.
Michael Morley, 700 Mississippi Street. I've been a big fan of the Tour of Lawrence races ever since it's been going on, and a big fan of racing in general. The growth of the racing industry, the bike racing industry, is incredible. This last weekend, there were over 1,000 racers down in Emporia at their gravel grinder, and I doubt if you'd find very many businesses down there that would be complaining about taking up their spaces. The Tour of California a couple of weeks ago generated more than $1 million a day in their statewide increase. It's becoming a big business. And this downtown race is the anchor of the race setup that we have. So people have, the volunteers are ready to go, have things in place to do all this stuff. And we just need some help from you guys. Really, what we're asking for is 3 hours and 45 minutes. And the compromises have been made over the course of the last few weeks to where we really have it to the place where we just have enough room to do it all. But by clearing the downtown streets by before 4 o'clock opens things up to all the businesses, the restaurants. And I read all the correspondence that I think you guys got over the last couple of days. And I think it's notable, there was pro and con letters, but I think it's notable that none of the 100 bars or restaurants are in opposition to this race that I've heard of. I can't say that definitively, but there's nobody on any of the letters that you got or that I've seen. So what it comes down to is 3 hours and 45 minutes to have a race that's going to grow and is going to be a great asset to Lawrence in the years to come. And we're only thing asking from you is a little bit of time. And I think, the question to ask yourselves when you decide this evening is, how is squashing this event going to benefit the city of Lawrence? Thanks.
I had no idea that I was supposed to speak today, so I apologize. My name is Shauna Swanson, and I'm representing Hobbs and Spectators at 700 Massachusetts Street. And I have worked all of the races the past years that it has been a part of downtown Lawrence. And we do think that this race is a wonderful event. However, what it does for our personal business is it does make a huge impact on the day in a negative way. We end up losing thousands of dollars on that particular day because of the closures that happen. I do understand that it is 3 hours and 45 minutes. But what I don't understand is that if you look at many of the other events, such as the MS Walk or the races in the morning, why it can't just be moved earlier and ended at noon. Our business hours on Sunday are typically 11:30 to 4:30. By closing down the street until 3:45, you've essentially cost me a day. And by doing that, it's almost like it's saying to us that it's okay to lose business for that day. I do understand what everyone is saying when it comes to we're bringing all of this positivity to downtown. And yes, that is happening. There is great exposure that's happening to downtown. But to the retail stores that are down there and speaking for them, it is very, very difficult when those spaces are occupied by other things to have any kind of business that can be conducted during those times. For us, in counting traffic that first time, we had 2 customers all day on Sunday. And that's with the door open. It is also an extremely hot weekend typically. And so to add one more step onto that during that time can create some really unfair challenges for us. Again, I like this event. I think it could be very cool. But to have it go all day, essentially, even though 3:45 to many people isn't all day, it is all day for business on a Sunday for us. It is very expensive to have a storefront down there. It is very expensive to continue to do business down there. And to add one more issue to that part of it, where you're taking 3 hours and 45 minutes out of our day, is tough. And it adds an even bigger element of cost. Just like the Campbells also said, if you look up and down the street, you're seeing vacancies happen.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Chris Lowers, 2628 Ridge Court. I just feel compelled to speak up for the business owners. I heard the event would bring in maybe 300 people, but why should we be favoring out-of-towners at the expense of the people who live and work in town and make their money? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Sally Zagrai. I'm the Executive Director of Downtown Lawrence, Inc. at 833.5 Massachusetts Street. Downtown Lawrence is happy to welcome visitors, participants, and spectators at the 65 events downtown is host to each year. Some of these require street closures of an hour, some most of a day, and some, like the Busker Festival, certain blocks over multiple days. There's absolutely no question that events involving street closures, especially such a large number of them, affect our businesses, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. Our organization has asked for consideration after 8 years of hosting this event for a different course and/or time frame, and repeatedly said that a course that does not involve such a drastic closure and long time frame could work. That is why we've asked for a compromise street closure from 5 a.m. to 12 p.m. rather than 3:30. The event, as outlined in the permit application, features a race route that closes portions of all 3 major north-south streets. That's Mass, Vermont, and New Hampshire, as well as 4 east-west streets, 7th through 10th streets, for the majority of an entire weekend business day. This restricts access to the major surface parking lot on New Hampshire Street between 8th and 9th, restricts access to New Hampshire Street Garage, limits access to the Vermont Street Garage. Yes, they can go in from Kentucky, but if people are trying to find their way, takes up all of the streets, the metered spaces on Mass, and it takes them up on New Hampshire and Vermont. And yes, we have 324 new parking spaces in the Vermont Street Garage, but where are the cyclists going to be parking? And they're spectators. Race organizers have said they will assist vehicles trying to enter the New Hampshire Garage, and hopefully that will occur, but that is a huge loss of parking. To essentially close off so many downtown streets for nearly the entire business day and to take such a large percentage of parking deters many regular customers and residents in general, as they do not want to figure out where to park and walk. Parking is an issue. Whether we believe it or not, the public perception is it's hard to park downtown on any day. That also affects the alleys. It affects deliveries to restaurants and from restaurants. Downtown businesses, retailers in particular, must adjust to the demand of an ever-changing market. The weather, the stock market, other outside pressures and events affect the businesses on a daily basis. Weekend days are critical, and they cannot be replaced or made up. You don't get that time back. Most of the retailers are open from 12 to 5 p.m. on a Sunday, so a closure until 3:30 essentially allows for 1 to 1.5 hours of regular business. I'm out, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment? Okay. Back to the commission.
Is Mark Teal still here? Where are you at? Oh, there you are. Just had a question regarding their application and kind of standard procedure. I note on that their application was received May 2nd, which I guess is effectively 59 days prior to the event. On an event that requires a large-scale street closure, is that a standard amount of time for the city to be given notice?
Well, we don't have a standard as of yet. That's one of the things that we are developing this year, hopefully for 2019. But yes, 60 days for an event this size is not enough time.
Okay.
So again, we are considering the appeal of an administrative denial of a temporary use of right-of-way permit for the 2018 tour of Lawrence. I'm trying to think about the procedural aspects of this, and I look over and I don't see Scott of the Planning Commission. So, staff, help us out.
Jeff's there. Jeff.
Jeff's pretty capable.
Right,
Jeff's
but
very capable.
I know, but Jeff, it's not Jeff's issue. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think procedurally.
I think the procedure would be to override the denial if you wanted to approve it.
Okay.
And if you wanted to sustain the denial, you really don't have to take any action.
That's correct. And basically
Okay.
making this decision, you step into the shoes of the administration or the administrator that makes the decision. So basically, you just review everything that you've seen, the application, and make the best decision
Okay.
you can. 3-2 vote,
Okay.
one way or the other,
Okay.
would be the deciding
So
factor.
we will discuss, and then if we decide that we're going to concur with the denial, we need no motion. If we want to overturn it, then we'll need a motion. And apologies to Jeff. I'm happy to see you there.
I'm confident he would have said exactly the same thing.
Probably would have, yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's our charge, and that's how we can communicate our decision.
As a point of information, Captain Squire shouldn't be blamed for the closure of Mass Street. Ultimately, those decisions end up in my lap. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't have people recommending those things to me, but I don't wish to leave that lay in his lap. That's my responsibility.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. So again, back to the commission. I think we understand what our options are.
The reason I asked Mark that question was it seems I want to go back almost 3 years to, I think it was a conversation, Stuart, you kind of led the charge on when we started talking about making budget requests be done to a specific cycle. One of the concerns was that, for lack of a more politically correct way to phrase it, we oftentimes ended up negotiating with, the gun to the head strategy of, we need this money right now or else no dice. And we got kind of sick of that approach, and so we said budget requests need to be done at a specific time. Everyone needs to be in the same cycle so that we don't end up having that gun to the head philosophy. My concern with this event application is it feels to me, again, like that gun to the head negotiating philosophy. When you're talking about closing down 3 major blocks of retail sector for effectively an entire business day for a Sunday time schedule, for city staff to receive that 59 days before the event feels a little short-sighted to me in terms of being able to properly create a negotiation. I think this is an event that easily could have a negotiated process that would lead to both sides being satisfied. But, as you look at the calendar, this event's now in less than 4 weeks. There's no time frame for that, in my opinion, at this point. And that's a frustration that I face in dealing with this issue, is that the timing of it, to me, is poor. I would love for us to be having this conversation in January or February, or maybe even March. But to have this conversation in June for a July 1 event, you're left with not a whole lot of options.
To me, it seems that it would, obviously the race is great. I don't have any issue with the race, but perhaps it might be a good idea to find a, like one of those kind of bank holidays where everything is already closed anyways. Like, I don't know, 4th of July, if businesses are planning to be open 4th of July, but perhaps to have it on that day and have it kind of the same ways that cities have conferences during the week, as they want to boost people coming to some place during the days that they have trouble getting people down there. So that makes me look at either a holiday or more of a weekday kind of arrangement. I think that would be perhaps a really good compromise.
Were you at all concerned about the closing of 9th Street for this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
I just wanted to focus on perhaps if there are dates that things are already closed, that might be a good day to pinpoint for closing streets.
Well, I think the short time frame that they're trying to accomplish getting this through is an issue, and I agree with Matthew on that. But then I also, it sounds to me like both parties have tried to discuss and compromise, and what they've come up with that seems to work is the 5 to noon, and if it doesn't work for the other side, then I would be reluctant to overturn this, because I believe that the downtown businesses should have a say in this. 65 events, that's a lot of events for a year. So.
Yeah, I think about the privately owned businesses that we have downtown, and there are a lot of them, and their income will be directly affected. So even if there is other income in the city through hotels, other spending, that doesn't feed their family in that moment. I think that by having the KU basketball closure, we've exacerbated this issue and kind of brought it to the forefront unintentionally. And I think it's a broader conversation that needs to occur, how we are going to manage the number of closures that we have downtown, what those look like, what that process should look like. As a former business owner downtown that wasn't retail or dining, the sidewalk sale day even makes it difficult to come to work. It was an unofficial holiday. There are things that you do to accommodate the things that happen downtown on a regular basis when you're a downtown business owner, but that does get trying on occasion. I also think about, what does a retail loss look like for our businesses when the street is closed? Is there some kind of application fee that we could look at that might somehow contribute to the profits that are lost by those businesses on the days that those streets are closed, and their businesses are affected? And that would obviously be businesses that have some kind of record of that over time. But I think that's something to think about at least, or for organizations or businesses that are requesting, or events that are requesting those kinds of closures, to look at what the real actual impact is on those families. So I definitely hear the voice of the independent business owners downtown, and I definitely share the concern about the process and the maybe the need for a little bit more policy around that, so that we can ensure that those negotiations are able to take place.
I don't have a lot to add to that, so I think what I'm hearing is a reluctance to overturn the administrative decision on the part of this commission.
Yes.
So I don't believe we need a motion.
Yes, I think it would be appropriate to have a motion to affirm the decision.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd entertain such a motion.
I would move to affirm the decision of the administrative denial of a temporary use of right-of-way for the 2018 tour of Lawrence.
Second.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Herbert, second from Vice Mayor Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll move on now to commission items.
I have something.
Go ahead.
I have a prepared statement. I'm not comfortable approving further click it or ticket campaigns or approving increased traffic patrol or a new traffic unit until we have the following components implemented. 3 things: body cameras for all officers. Second one, race demographic collection data from all stops and potentially all contacts. Third item, CIT training for all officers, including de-escalating techniques. I very much appreciate what the police force does for our community, but we must better prove to the public that we are addressing overrepresentation of minority populations in the criminal justice system. And I would add that we've already lost in the court of public opinion. Pass that to Tom, please. As of last week. That's to go to Rochelle.
Other commission items.
Yes, I have a statement as well. I think it's a little broader than what Leslie brought to us, but I want to touch briefly on the issues brought to the commission tonight through public comment regarding the police shooting of a black man and the issue of the discriminatory policing board, as well as other issues that have brought the focus of the city and the commission recently on issues regarding race, and, and more broadly equity. In the 17 years I've been in Lawrence, we've held ourselves out as a city committed to diversity and representation, light years ahead of other communities around the state. In many ways we are, but with that point of pride, we also have to humble ourselves and say that we are not as diverse as we think we are. Lawrence is an 82% white community, and that we may not be as committed to equity as we would hold ourselves out to be. There is some data to support this assertion. 10% of the Douglas County jail population is black, while the black population represents less than 5% of our community. Our city library lacks staff that reflects racial diversity of our community. And never before has a woman of color contributed a mural to our city. And these are just a few recent items that have been publicly identified. Until we have representation on the city commission, in our advisory boards, and throughout the city staff that is reflective of our community as a whole, until we have a decision-making process and processes that truly integrate an intersectional approach, we aren't there. My intent here is not to call anyone out, but to call people in. That is to say, how can we lift each other up so that we are truly an equitable community? The first step, I believe, is accessing data that paints a whole picture of who in our community accesses services and who doesn't. Recently, the city began engaging in a process like this by issuing a voluntary survey to city advisory board members. This survey, taken by 85 individuals, identified that 71 out of 85 members identified as white, and most members were heterosexual, economically secure, and able-bodied. This is a starting point for our commission to be proactively seeking broader diversity on our advisory boards. But data relevant to the work we do as a commission shouldn't stop there. We have received a request that the city fund a study that would track the demographics of individuals pulled over for traffic stops. When faced with numbers indicating disproportionate stops for specific populations, we can no longer sweep considerable anecdotal evidence under the rug. If we would find otherwise, then so much the better. We should collect this data more broadly as well. That includes collecting data regarding the bus service use, civil and criminal court use, social service use, federal program use, mental health service use, and city-sponsored events and artistic funding and other data that would contribute to that. We're in Kansas, and historically, Kansas is known as a flyover state. Lawrence is the exception to that. We do stand out, and we do so with intent. So we have an opportunity here to be the kind of city that can lead other cities and municipalities throughout the state in transparent, equitable policy and decision-making. We have an opportunity to step outside of the cloak of unconscious and sometimes conscious attitudes and beliefs and systemic race and sexism and say that enough is enough. We are committed to each member of our community. So I want to know. I want to know what I don't see. I want to understand what I don't understand, and I'm willing to take on that work without expecting the work to be done by our minoritized and unrepresented communities. In order to do that, I have to start somewhere, and I ask my fellow commissioners to commit with me to continuing this conversation and translating these conversations into action. I have no delusion that a small group of community leaders can eradicate these issues from our society, but I refuse to be complicit by being silent and by trying nothing and maintaining an unsustainable status quo that says the table is too small for everyone to have access. When all of us are committed, we can work together to build a bigger table. And I think our community can be the one that is willing to make the blueprints that will enable other communities to see that when we lift others up, when we address issues rather than repress them, our entire community thrives.
Thank you.
Got actually a handful of things. I'll try to be quick. First thing, I wanted to just a quick thanks to some city staff. I had an opportunity, I had an independent study student this year and a political science course, and we took kind of a very last second, I mean, it was very literally last second field trip to City Hall very recently. And I wanted to give a quick shout out, Porter Arneal, Brandon McGuire, Jeff Crick, Amy Miller, Tony Wheeler, Chuck Souls, Mark Teal for like 6 seconds in an elevator. I grabbed him and they were absolutely amazing. We you know, a lot of times when we get staff recommendations, it just says city staff, and that these city staff are oftentimes nameless people, you know, a man behind the curtain. These individuals took some time out of their day to talk to a student of mine and who has an interest in local politics and kind of getting involved in this, and did an absolutely outstanding job. And so I just wanted to take a couple seconds to thank them for their contributions. Second thing I wanted to address came out of public comment I heard tonight. I believe it was Laura Green. Is that correct? Okay, I want to make sure I'm... for quite a while now, I've been interested in what's happening across the country. You know, Laura pointed out that we are facing right now a majority of states that have in some degree, whether medicinally or recreationally, legalized marijuana. Obviously, what she brought forward tonight is not dealing with legalization. That's a state issue. That's outside our purview as a city commission. But she brought forth some interesting ideas about ways that we can look at our ordinance in terms of addressing a more progressive stance on this. And I wanted to take about 30 seconds of your time here and just kind of echo her comments that this would be a conversation that I'd be interested in having. I don't know if that looks like an agenda item or a work session. It probably looks like a work session. But I would be one voice at the table that would be very interested in entertaining that conversation. I think that when Laura started her work, she was probably an outlier, you know, but we're to a point now where the outlier has become the majority, and we're to a point where our state stands as a minority among states. And one of the things we do, you know, I was kind of moved actually by former Mayor Amex's comments when he talked about why he's choosing to run for office. He said he sat here for so long, he had begun to realize that what the state does has a huge impact on us, and he wanted to move himself into that position. I think sometimes it can work the other way too, that what we do as a city, I mean, I think we're the 5th or 6th largest city in the state, and so certainly what we do doesn't go unnoticed. And I think there are some ways in our community we can take a more progressive look at policy, and I would be interested just as one voice in doing that. And then the third and final thing, kind of the only thing I planned actually to say, in between the time we've had our last meeting and now, we've actually had quite a lengthy break off. City of Lawrence lost one of our employees, and the part that was most interesting to me was, this is one of those people I never knew had a last name. Every time I talked to him, it was, "Hey, Bill. Hey, Bill." And so when the email first came from, I think Tom Marcus had sent it, I didn't even recognize the name. And that, looking back, is kind of saddens me, because I just had always known him as the first name. And I think your email had addressed him as William, which is just his full name. But I had wanted to say something. Bill was a guy who I had talked to time and again, and he was always an interesting gentleman. But then I came across a letter that had been written, and I don't know if the person who wrote this wants to be anonymous or not, but it's also somebody that I talked to a lot at the city. And so if I could just take 2 minutes and read the letter that he actually wrote, I think it's a way better tribute than I could have ever written. So the letter goes, Bill Music, I suppose is how you say his last name. I don't actually know. I just always called him Bill. There are many people who work for the City of Lawrence. They fulfill roles that many citizens do not notice. Recognition is not the goal of city employees. Getting the job done is. One of those employees was named Bill Music. He was a friend of mine. When I started working at City Hall in 2015, he became my second friend here. Bill died at his home on May 18th, 2018. His death was unexpected, and I miss him. Bill's official title was Senior Maintenance Worker. Bill was part electrician, part fabricator, part Einstein, and a little bit Willy Wonka. His skill set amazed me. He offered to teach or show me things that he did. He didn't believe he could do things that others couldn't learn. He was 100% right about that. Bill was humble, capable, and most of all, helpful. Bill would likely object to the title Unsung Hero, because no matter how far out of the way he would go to assist someone, he considered it his job. He took his work seriously. I recognized and respected those traits the day we met. I am very fortunate that we became friends. City Hall is full of politics. It's part of the job. With Bill, the person who was in charge really didn't matter to him. The work mattered. If we were in a particular political period, he never slacked off. He didn't waver. He always did his job. Bill did very hard work, mostly outside, in 105-degree heat or sub-zero Kansas winters. Bill did the type of work most people can't imagine doing on a daily basis, or at least I can't. But as life goes on, there's an opportunity to recognize the hundreds of city staffers, full-time, part-time, and temporary, that make Lawrence run. It's not magic. It's through the effort of people that care, like Bill, which allow us to live and create a community like Lawrence. Bill's office was at City Hall, but in reality, his office was Lawrence, Kansas. For one short moment, think about all the others like Bill, the unsung heroes, that make this community the special place that it is. Bill's work is everywhere. When you're on Massachusetts Street, look up, because you're seeing a small part of what he did for all of us. There was only one Bill Music, but you are surrounded by unsung heroes if you just open your eyes and look. So.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yep.
I would also be interested in discussing that proposal that we heard tonight in public comment.
From Laura.
Yes.
Sounds like that's an issue.
Put it on the work session list.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I don't think I made it clear because my statements were written, but I was making an ask that if the commission agrees, we asked staff to look at how we can better measure the demographics of individuals who are accessing services, maybe not specifically that list that I mentioned, but in ways that we can identifiably measure, and that we do, once that data is kind of aggregated, dedicate a study session to reviewing that information and kind of taking a look at what disparity looks like in our community. And I didn't know if other commissioners were interested in engaging in that conversation, or if we were interested in requesting that we find how we can find that information.
I'm interested in that conversation. And I think that what we need to do is we need to work on talking about exactly how we want to have that conversation. I'm a little reluctant to assign staff to data collection in advance of having a better understanding. You did give credit to that survey that was done of the advisory boards. I think we could try to build on that. I think that'd be great. But, I mean, this is a conversation that we and the community need to have. So how we accomplish that will be our challenge.
How will we move forward in moving forward to accomplish that?
Can I enter this conversation?
Please do.
Yeah.
I've been having some back and forth between myself and the county over the DMC study, disproportionate minority contact. I've actually had experience in doing that back in Iowa City. And it's not as simple as one might think. In fact, if you look at the proposal that the county's dealing with right now, they have 3 PhDs doing a paper on this that has multiple steps built into this proposal that will take, several months to accomplish. And there's some unique characteristics that you have to kind of consider in the process of the data collection. We already do some data collection. One of the steps is to evaluate what we currently do. The county is suggesting that we split the cost. The initial cost proposal was $200,000 to do that. I think they've cut the cost back to $175,000. I've encouraged Robert with the CJCC to contact Iowa City and speak to the chief and the city manager up there. I guess what I would suggest to you is that there's some simple things that, quite frankly, you could do. It seems to me that you're looking for results, and it seems to me that you're trying to encourage and engage a more diversified city. And doing that, there's some simple things I think you could do in terms of recognizing that that should be one of the considerations that you all make when you make appointments to your boards and commissions. Those are the influencers back to you. People that choose to run for office, those characteristics, you're not going to define those kind of characteristics as a pre-qualifier, but you could have that impact on your boards and commissions. The state of Iowa, not to repeat, but they have a gender balance requirement built into their state law. And so when when you make appointments, the mayor makes appointments, concurrence with the commission, they have to take that into consideration and do. And if there isn't somebody available, they wait. So there's a lot of things that you could be doing to consider that diversity. And diversity, there's a lot of categories of diversity that, quite frankly, I don't think are all necessarily protected classifications that we should be considering, I think, in terms of the appointment to get different perspectives back to you as the governing board. We look at those issues, of course, in employment. But I think what I would suggest to you is that we need to evolve this conversation with the DMC, the Disproportionate Minority Contact Study, first. And I think that will help you start to think of ways that we need to evaluate this. I'm not ready to send the staff out to start just collecting data.
Sure.
I think we do need that kind of conversation amongst the commissioners. And I think once you get the DMC data back, you're going to have a lot of conversations, not just with the police department and the city administration, but with your public, and kind of reveal those things. But there's 3 kind of prongs to what we're doing in terms of this issue: the DMC study, the body cameras, and the CPRB, the Community Police Review Board. Those are 3 critical elements that we're currently working on. And I mean, we're getting closer to getting it right. I almost encouraged you tonight to move forward, because it's easier to amend than to create whole cloth every time with these ordinances. But your conversation had a momentum of its own, and I didn't want to interfere with that. So we know what our direction is. I would just say, let's get this DMC thing moving and understanding that. And I think you're going to be bringing in, whether it's the 3 Boston PhDs or somebody else, you're going to be bringing in some people in here that'll give you some pretty good ideas about how to engage and how to expand that idea that I think this whole board is interested in.
Yeah, and
Fair enough?
yeah, I think so. And I think beyond the criminal justice system
Right.
is looking at, the funding decisions that we're being asked to make, the housing decisions, the arts decisions. Those kind of decisions are impacted disproportionately sometimes as well. And I think that that's where we might not have as concrete an understanding of where representation exists or doesn't in our community. So I don't want to focus solely. Obviously, I want to focus on the criminal legal system, but not solely on that.
I get that. Yeah, I heard that. Okay.
Mayor, if we're adding that discussion to a work session, can you do a motion on that?
Yeah.
I didn't
The
entertain
ordinance for- I
I
thought-
entertain a motion from Commissioner Herbert on that, since he
Yeah. I would move that we place on a future public, or on a future work session item, conversation regarding the Lawrence ordinance on marijuana.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Herbert, second from Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Any other commission items? I believe this is the first week of the summer lunch program that is being conducted by a group of entities. It's a function of the USD 497. They provide a lot of the support for that. The County Extension Service also participates, as do the Boys and Girls Club, and I'm just really hoping that we get a good turnout for these lunches. Feeding the kids over the summer is a really significant thing, and I appreciate the work of all the partners, and I hope that we'll get some data, as Commissioner Ananda said, about how the response is. And I'd like to see Derek over here. The city's Parks and Rec is a major partner in that, and I'm hoping that we'll be meeting the targets that the USD 497 needs to make their costs work out. So I'll be real interested in how that information comes out, and appreciate the work that everybody's doing. Okay, city manager's report.
Speaking of unsung heroes and people that show up and take care of business, whether it's weekends or otherwise, we had a fairly significant storm in town. Our Public Works and Parks and Rec departments responded quite admirably, and the decisions were made that we opened up the compost facility from 9 to 5 last Saturday, and drop-off and the fees for bringing debris were waived. Our crews are out picking up the debris on the sides of the road, and we will be open again on Saturday, this Saturday, the compost facility from 9 to 3, and the drop-off fee again will be waived, considering the debris that was generated by the storm. We got your budget information out a little earlier than normal, and that session will be taking place next Tuesday. The total budget this year is about a $206 million budget, and we're holding the millage level at this point, but requests keep funneling in, so we'll see how that turns out. I imagine there'll be a few decisions that the commission gets to make before that's all over with. You did see that there was we did have Mayor Boley send a letter off to our congressional delegation, and they have responded in kind, raising questions with Amtrak regarding the Southwest Chief route and the Amtrak's delay or slow release of funds for that route, and they joined in on that conversation. We reported out to you on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and some information regarding what they're working on. They did recommend, or are recommending, that the Parks and Rec Board be increased from 5 to 7 members. I think they're still discussing the time and time of their meetings and day. And they are working on bylaws. One of the commissioners asked that they be allowed to look at those, and so we are having those sent to all the commissioners so you can see those bylaws. Lawrence Parks and Recreation Department was announced as a finalist for the National Gold Medal. This is a repeat performance on the Parks and Rec Department's side. They were, this is the 4th time they've been recognized, and we have some pretty stiff competition. Bloomington, Indiana, Evanston, Illinois, and Greeley, Colorado are in our category. If you get a chance, there's a link to a video that was prepared by our staff, and I, for one, and I think a number of staff that have looked at it all think that that should get a gold medal. It's really a nice job in the presentation. I think you'd be, first off, you'd be surprised about how comprehensive your Parks and Rec program really is, and what a nice job they did putting that video together. And some of the creativity goes to Roger, and some of it goes to our friend that runs the cameras back here every night. So we want to thank them for that work as well. CDBG funding of low moderate income neighborhood associations. This was a kind of a report because I had a sense that not all the commissioners really understood some of the funding that goes out. This is neighborhood association funding, and there's public service activity funding, and some non-public service capital improvement type funding. So we gave you a fairly comprehensive report in that regard. Gave you an update on the 19th Street, Iowa to Naismith Drive project, and I won't go into that. I think you've heard quite a bit about that already. The Lawrence affordable housing efforts highlighted in a documentary about the affordable housing in Kansas City. We were called out for our Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Affordable Housing Sales Tax, which I hope you realize what a unique effort that is, not just in the state of Kansas, but on a national level. The efforts that the whole city team and the public getting behind that are really a huge step for a city, and having it happen here says a lot about this community, in my opinion. So you should all feel very good about that, in my opinion. Sales tax reports are out, and some of the information there shows that the attached April year-to-date was up by 0.7%, but that the April to April from 17 to 18 was a 5.8% drop. So those are all things that, you know, it's just a snapshot. You have to keep an eye on bigger trends in that regard. We're also, you saw a report on pilot program test backup technologies for city meeting taping and broadcast, and so we're trying some different technology to make sure that we can have a backup system, as I understand it, and try different approaches to that. And you can certainly talk to Kurt on the way out and get more details on that. And then for future agenda items, we now have the CPRB coming back on 6/19, along with the massage ordinance and the MSO ordinances, and receive the Lawrence bus transfer location analysis. So bring your pillows, because that could be an interesting meeting. And then in terms of work sessions, next week is a big work session. We're going to have the budget on, and we'll have the department heads here going through their individual department budgets as well. Like we said, the commissioners have been encouraging us to get this information out as early as we can. We hope that didn't cause haste makes waste in terms of the product, but we have a few months to work on this, so we've got time to get it right. So.
Thanks for getting that out.
And
I
that's
have
it.
a question about
thank
the
you very
August
much.
7th budget meeting. That's the night that is the public hearing on the budget, in the budget ordinance on the first reading.
Yes.
Is there anything else expected that night because that's an election night?
Oh, that's an election.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I would ask that there not be. How about I put it that way?
It's a primary night.
But there's no Republican
Is there any
candidate.
real race that night?
So I would ask that we not have anything else
Well, you need to look at your fellow
for that.
commissioners for that one.
So you're the only one.
We gotta solve all those problems before August 7th, Leslie.
So I would ask that we not have really anything else serious that
Oh,
night.
okay, so we'd have the budget reading on, but limit the rest of the items. That's what you're saying?
That's exactly what
Okay.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
We'll make that effort.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tom. Meeting list.
I'll be at the ribbon cutting on Tuesday with my kids who are very excited to see this
This is
process.
the wastewater treatment plant?
Thursday, yeah. The other Tuesday.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'm gonna be there too, yeah. Y'all come.
I'm working on it.
Yeah,
It's a hard sell.
yeah.
Well, something about it being our anniversary.
Yeah.
Offering to take her to a wastewater treatment facility. I'm working on it.
It'll be memorable.
That's the new one. Come on.
Well, that's,
Yeah. There's another event on the 11th. It's, I believe at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's wall raising at the Van Trust location. I'll be out there.
I won't be able to attend that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on here.
Yeah, I'll be there too.
Is
at
that
the
on there?
11th, at
Mhm.
9 o'clock.
Monday, June 11th.
I'm not seeing it on my
It's
calendar.
right under Walker's
Go back.
wastewater treatment.
To the main agenda, not the
Main
calendar.
agenda, okay. I'm looking at the calendar, I'm not seeing it. Yeah. Okay, so you're gonna be there?
I'll be there, yes.
I'm gonna be there.
It's already on the calendar, so you're good.
Okay, great, okay. It's an invitation-only event though, too, so
Can you do that?
we have,
Can you do that?
yeah, yeah, okay, so it's not an open forum, so we'll just celebrate the panel raising. Okay,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
we have a motion from Commissioner Soden, second from Commissioner Herbert, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much.